would you do if your child collapsed and no one came to help? In this medieval tale, a desperate mother puts all her hope in the hands of a stranger and a king. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you like the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The morning air hung heavy over the cobblestone streets of London, carrying with it the acrid scent of smoke from 1,000 hearths and the earthier smell of horses and unwashed bodies. The city sprawled beneath a gray sky, its narrow lanes winding between timber-framed buildings that leaned precariously toward one another, their upper stories nearly touching across the width of the street. It was the kind of cold that seeped into bones and refused to leave, the kind that made even the sturdiest men pull their cloaks tighter and quicken their pace. In the poorest quarter of the city, where the streets were little more than rutted mud paths, and the buildings seemed held together by nothing more than hope and stubbornness, a woman named Beatrice knelt beside her son in the middle of the thoroughfare. Her hands trembled as they hovered over the boy's still form, afraid to touch him, afraid that any movement might make things worse. Thomas was 12 years old, tall for his age but thin as a willow branch, and he lay sprawled on the cold stones as if someone had simply cut the strings holding him upright. Beatrice's dress was a patchwork of grays and browns, layers of wool and rough linen that had been mended so many times the original fabric was barely visible. Her hair, once a rich chestnut, now bore streaks of premature gray that escaped from beneath a simple cloth cap. Her face, though lined with hardship and worry, still held traces of the beauty she had possessed in her youth. Her eyes, a striking shade of green, were wide with panic as she looked down at her son. "Thomas," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Thomas, please, open your eyes. Please, my darling boy." The street around them had fallen silent. Vendors who normally called out their wares stood mute, their hands frozen in mid-gesture. Women carrying water buckets had stopped to stare. Even the usual cacophony of the city seemed to fade, leaving only the sound of Beatrice's ragged breathing and the distant cry of gulls from the Thames. Thomas's face was pale, almost translucent in the weak morning light. His lips had taken on a bluish tinge that made Beatrice's heart clench with terror. He had been walking beside her just moments ago, chattering about the work he hoped to find at the docks, about how he would earn enough coin to buy bread and perhaps even some salted fish for their supper. Then, without warning, he had stumbled. She had thought at first that he had merely tripped over the uneven stones, but when he did not rise, when his body remained motionless on the ground, she knew something was terribly wrong. "Someone help us," Beatrice called out, her voice rising to a desperate pitch. "Please, someone help my son." An elderly woman shuffled forward, her gnarled hands pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "What happened, Beatrice? Did he fall?" "I don't know, Margaret, I don't know. He was fine, he was talking, and then he just collapsed." Beatrice's voice broke on the last word, and tears began to stream down her cheeks, cutting clean paths through the grime that coated her skin. Margaret knelt beside them with difficulty, her old knees protesting the movement. She placed a weathered hand against Thomas's forehead, then moved it to his neck, searching for a pulse. Her expression grew grave. His heart still beats, but it's weak, very weak. She looked up at Beatrice with eyes full of sympathy and something else, something that looked like resignation. "The boy needs a physician, Beatrice. More than that, he needs medicine, proper care, things we cannot provide here." "I have no coin for a physician," Beatrice said, her voice hollow. "I spent the last of it on bread 2 days ago. There's nothing left. Nothing at all." The crowd that had gathered around them murmured with sympathy, but no one stepped forward with offers of help. They were all in the same situation, struggling to survive, one meal away from starvation themselves. Charity was a luxury they could not afford. A young man pushed his way through the crowd, his presence commanding attention despite his common dress. He wore a tunic of dark gray wool, belted at the waist with a strip of worn leather, and a cloak that had seen better days hung from his broad shoulders. His face was striking, with strong angular features and intense blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His hair, dark as a raven's wing, was tied back from his face with a leather cord, revealing a jaw shadowed with stubble. His name was William, and he worked as a blacksmith's apprentice in a forge not far from where they stood. William had known Beatrice for years. She had been kind to him when he first arrived in London as a boy of 14, alone and frightened after his father's death. She had shared what little food she had, asked nothing in return, and treated him with a maternal warmth he had not felt since his mother passed when he was young. He owed her a debt he could never fully repay. "Beatrice," William said, dropping to one knee beside her. His voice was deep and steady, an anchor in the chaos of her panic. "What can I do? Tell me what you need." She looked at him with eyes full of desperation. "He needs help, William, real help. But I have nothing. No way to pay for a physician, no way to—" "The king," an old man's voice called out from the crowd. "Send word to the king. He's known to be merciful to help those in need. Send a messenger." The suggestion hung in the air like something fragile and precious. The king. King Edward, who ruled from his palace across the city, surrounded by wealth and power beyond anything these people could imagine. It seemed absurd, impossible that a poor woman from the slums might reach him with her plea. But Beatrice's eyes lit with a desperate hope. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, the king. They say he listens to the people, that he cares about even the lowest of his subjects. If I could just get word to him, if I could just make him understand." "I'll go," William said immediately. "I'll take your message to the palace. I'll find a way to reach him." Beatrice grasped his hand with both of hers, her grip surprisingly strong. "Tell him my son fell in the street and cannot get up. Tell him Thomas is dying and I have no means to save him. Beg him, William. Beg him for mercy." William nodded solemnly. "I will. I promise you, Beatrice, I will do everything in my power to bring help." He stood, his tall frame rising above the crowd. At 25 years of age, he was in the prime of his strength, his body hardened by years of working at the forge. His hands were calloused and scarred from handling hot metal, but they were gentle as he briefly touched Thomas's shoulder before turning to leave. As William pushed through the crowd, making his way toward the broader streets that would lead him to the palace district, Beatrice returned her attention to her son. She carefully lifted his head and placed it in her lap, stroking his hair with shaking fingers. Thomas's breathing was shallow and irregular, each breath seeming to require tremendous effort. "Hold on, my darling boy," she whispered. "Help is coming. William will bring help. You just need to hold on a little longer." Margaret remained beside them, her presence a small comfort. Other neighbors brought a worn blanket to cover Thomas, and someone fetched a cup of water in case he should wake and need it. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, and then longer, the hope that had briefly flared began to dim. The palace was far away, and the chances of a common blacksmith's apprentice gaining an audience with the king seemed impossibly small. Yet Beatrice refused to give up hope. She continued to stroke Thomas's hair, to whisper words of encouragement, to pray to every saint she could name that her son would survive. The morning light grew stronger, though the sky remained overcast, and the city around them slowly returned to its usual rhythm of commerce and survival. But in that small circle of cobblestones, time seemed suspended, held in the grip of a mother's love and fear. William ran through the streets with single-minded determination. His long legs ate up the distance, his boots splashing through puddles and leaping over obstacles. He knew the city well, knew which shortcuts would save him precious minutes, which streets to avoid because they would be clogged with merchants' carts or livestock being driven to market. His breath came in steady gasps, his heart pounding not just from exertion, but from the weight of the responsibility he carried. The streets began to change as he moved from the poor quarter toward the center of the city. The buildings grew taller and more elegant, their facades painted or decorated with carved wood. The people he passed were better dressed, their cloaks lined with fur, their boots made of supple leather rather than cracked and worn hide. Guards stood at intersections, their chainmail gleaming dully in the gray light, their hands resting casually on the hilts of their swords. William barely noticed any of it. His mind was focused entirely on his mission, on the promise he had made to Beatrice. He had to reach the king. He had to make someone listen. Thomas's life depended on it. As the palace walls came into view, massive and imposing, William felt a moment of doubt. How was he, a common apprentice with no connections or influence, supposed to gain entry to the most secure building in the kingdom? How could he possibly reach the king? But he pushed the doubt aside. He had made a promise, and he would keep it or die trying. He approached the main gate where guards stood in their crimson and gold livery, their faces hard and impassive. They crossed their halberds as he approached, blocking his way. "State your business," one of them demanded, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. William straightened his shoulders, drawing himself up to his full height. "I carry a message for the king, a matter of life and death. A poor woman's son has fallen ill in the street and cannot rise. She begs His Majesty's mercy and aid." The guards exchanged glances, and William saw something flicker in their eyes. Amusement, perhaps, or pity for his naivety. "The king does not see every beggar who comes to his gates," the first guard said. "Take your message to the church. The priests might help if they have the inclination." "Please," William said, his voice steady despite the frustration building in his chest. "The boy is dying. His mother has no one else to turn to. I beg you, let me speak to someone, anyone who can carry this message to the king." The second guard, younger than his companion, and perhaps less hardened by his duties, seemed to hesitate. "There is a custom," he said slowly. "Any subject may petition the king during the morning audience, but that requires—" "I'll do whatever is required," William interrupted. "Just tell me what I must do." The guard studied him for a long moment, taking in his rough clothes and calloused hands, the desperation evident in his eyes. Finally, he nodded. "Very well. You may enter the outer courtyard and wait with the other petitioners. But I warn you, the wait may be long, and there is no guarantee the king will hear your petition today. He has many demands on his time." "I understand," William said. "Thank you. Thank you both." The guard stepped aside, allowing him to pass through the gate. William found himself in a vast courtyard paved with smooth stones. Other people waited there, perhaps 24 in all, each clutching scrolls or wearing expressions of anxious hope. Some were merchants by the look of their clothes, others minor nobles or representatives of guilds. All were better dressed than William, and all looked at him with barely concealed disdain as he took his place among them. William ignored their stares. He moved to a spot near the courtyard's center, where he could see the palace entrance clearly, and settled in to wait. Every minute that passed felt like an eternity. He thought of Thomas lying in the street, of Beatrice's desperate eyes, of the promise he had made. He clenched his fists, his jaw tight with determination. He would wait as long as it took. He would find a way to reach the king. He would not fail Beatrice or her son. Whatever it took, he would save Thomas's life. The palace courtyard seemed to grow colder as the morning wore on, though whether it was the temperature or simply William's growing anxiety, he could not say. He watched as servants hurried back and forth across the stone expanse, their arms laden with bundles or pushing carts filled with supplies. Occasionally a nobleman would sweep past, his fine cloak billowing behind him, his nose held high as if the very air breathed by common petitioners might somehow taint him. William shifted his weight from foot to foot, trying to keep his blood flowing. Around him, the other petitioners spoke in low voices, comparing notes about their various requests and complaints. A merchant to his left was seeking compensation for goods stolen by bandits on the King's Road. A woman in a modest but well-made dress hoped to secure her son's release from debtor's prison. Each had their own desperate story, their own reason for standing in this courtyard and hoping for an audience with the most powerful man in England. The sun climbed higher in the sky, though it remained hidden behind thick clouds that threatened rain. William's stomach growled, reminding him that he had eaten nothing since the previous evening, but he ignored the discomfort. Food could wait. Everything could wait until he had delivered his message. Finally, after what felt like hours, but was perhaps only one, the palace doors opened. A man emerged, dressed in rich burgundy robes trimmed with ermine fur. His gray hair was carefully combed, and he carried himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. A golden chain of office hung around his neck, marking him as someone of importance in the royal household. "I am Lord Chamberlain Aldrich," the man announced, his voice carrying easily across the courtyard. "His Majesty King Edward will grant audience to select petitioners this morning. When I call your name, you will proceed into the Great Hall and present your case. Speak clearly and concisely. The king's time is precious, and he has many matters demanding his attention." Aldrich began calling names from a scroll he carried. The merchant went first, then a guild master, then a minor lord with a dispute over land boundaries. Each time someone was called, William's heart leaped with hope, only to sink again when he realized his name had not been spoken. The crowd in the courtyard slowly dwindled as petitioners were either admitted or dismissed. When only a handful remained, including William, Aldrich looked up from his scroll with an expression of mild annoyance. "The rest of you will have to return another day. His Majesty has other obligations that cannot be delayed. Please, William called out, stepping forward before he could lose his nerve. Please, my lord. I carry a message of utmost urgency. A boy lies dying in the street, and his mother has sent me to beg the king's mercy. Every moment I delay brings him closer to death. Aldrich turned his gaze on William, his expression one of weary skepticism. He had clearly heard countless similar pleas over the years. Many people are suffering throughout the realm, young man. The king cannot personally attend to every tragedy. I understand that, my lord, William said, fighting to keep his voice level and respectful. But this woman has nowhere else to turn. She has no coin, no connections, nothing but her faith that our king is merciful and just. Please, I beg you, let me present her case. Let the king himself decide if her son is worthy of his aid. Something in William's tone, or perhaps in his eyes, must have moved the chamberlain. Aldrich studied him for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. What is your name? He asked finally. William, my lord. William Fletcher. I am an apprentice blacksmith. And this woman who sent you, what is her name? Beatrice, my lord. I do not know her family name. She lives in the poor quarter, near the eastern wall. Her son Thomas collapsed in the street this morning and cannot rise. She fears he is dying. Aldrich was silent for a moment longer, then he sighed. Very well, William Fletcher. I will allow you to present your petition, but be warned. The king is in a difficult mood today. The council meeting this morning did not go well, and he may not be receptive to emotional appeals. State your case quickly and clearly, then accept whatever decision he makes. Relief flooded through William with such intensity that his knees nearly buckled. Thank you, my lord, thank you. I will not waste the king's time. I promise you that. Aldrich gestured for William to follow him, and together they entered the palace. William had never been inside such a building before, and despite the urgency of his mission, he could not help but stare in amazement at the wealth and beauty surrounding him. The floors were paved with marble, polished to such a shine that he could see his reflection in them. Tapestries hung from the walls, depicting scenes of battle and courtly life in colors so vivid they seemed to glow. Torches burned in iron sconces, casting dancing shadows across everything, and the air smelled of beeswax and exotic incense. They walked through several corridors before arriving at a massive set of doors carved with intricate designs. 2 guards stood at attention on either side, and at Aldrich's nod, they pulled the doors open to reveal the great hall beyond. The hall was enormous, its ceiling soaring high overhead and supported by massive wooden beams. More tapestries adorned the walls, and narrow windows set high up allowed thin streams of gray light to filter down. At the far end of the hall, raised on a dais, sat the throne, and upon the throne sat King Edward himself. The king was a man in his early 40s, his dark hair beginning to show threads of silver at the temples. He wore a tunic of deep blue velvet, embroidered with golden thread in patterns that caught the torchlight. A heavy fur-lined cloak draped across his shoulders, and a simple golden circlet rested on his brow. His face was strong and angular, with a high forehead and piercing gray eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Despite the magnificence of his surroundings, there was a weariness to his posture, a tension in his jaw that spoke of burdens that weighed heavily upon him. Beside the throne, standing in a position of obvious privilege, was a young woman who immediately captured William's attention. She wore a gown of forest green wool, cut in layers that fell gracefully to the floor. The bodice was fitted, emphasizing her slender waist, and the sleeves were long and full, trimmed with dark fur at the cuffs. Her hair, a rich auburn that gleamed like burnished copper in the torchlight, was partially covered by a delicate veil held in place by a silver circlet. Her face was heart-shaped, with high cheekbones and a small, determined chin. But it was her eyes that truly stood out, a striking shade of amber that seemed to glow with their own inner light. She could not have been more than 22 or 23 years old, and her beauty was the kind that made men forget to breathe. This was Princess Isolde, the king's only daughter. William had heard of her, of course. Everyone in London knew of the princess who had refused 3 separate marriage proposals from powerful lords, much to her father's frustration. She was said to be headstrong and independent, more interested in matters of state and justice than in the traditional pursuits expected of a royal woman. Aldrich led William forward, stopping at a respectful distance from the throne. "Your Majesty," the chamberlain said, bowing low, "this is William Fletcher, a blacksmith's apprentice. He carries a petition from a woman in the eastern quarter." The king's gray eyes fixed on William with an intensity that made him want to look away. but he forced himself to meet that gaze. He bowed as deeply as he knew how, his heart hammering in his chest. "Rise," King Edward said, his voice deep and resonant. "Speak your petition, William Fletcher, and be quick about it. I have a dispute between two earls to settle, and they grow more contentious with every passing moment." William straightened, his mind racing to find the right words. "Your Majesty, I come on behalf of a woman named Beatrice, who lives in the poor quarter near the eastern wall. This morning, her son Thomas, a boy of 12 years, collapsed in the street and cannot rise. He grows weaker with each passing moment, and his mother fears he will not survive the day. She has no coin for a physician, no means to procure the medicine or care he needs. She sends me to beg your Majesty's mercy, to ask if you might extend your royal protection to include even the lowest of your subjects." The king's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. Beside him, Princess Isolde leaned forward slightly, her amber gaze fixed on William with sudden interest. "There are many sick children in London," the king said, his tone neutral. "Why should this boy receive special consideration?" "Because his mother believes in your Majesty's justice," William said, the words coming more easily now. "Because she has taught her son that England is ruled by a king who cares for all his people, not just the wealthy and powerful. If her faith is misplaced, if the king truly does not care whether a poor boy lives or dies, then I will return and tell her so. But I do not believe that is the case. I have heard of your Majesty's wisdom and compassion. I have heard that you seek to rule with justice, not merely with power. I ask you to prove those stories true." A murmur ran through the handful of courtiers and guards present in the hall. Aldrich looked alarmed, clearly thinking that William had overstepped with his boldness. But King Edward merely sat back in his throne, his expression thoughtful. "You speak well for a blacksmith's apprentice," the king observed. "Tell me, William Fletcher, what is this woman to you? Is she your mother? Your aunt?" "She is my neighbor, your Majesty. A woman who showed me kindness when I had nothing and no one. A woman who shared her bread with a hungry boy, asking nothing in return. I owe her a debt I can never fully repay, but I would start by saving her son's life, if such a thing is within my power." Princess Isolde rose from her seat, her movements graceful and fluid. She descended from the dais and approached William, her eyes never leaving his face. Up close, she was even more beautiful, and William found himself momentarily speechless. "This woman taught her son about our father's justice," Isolde said, her voice clear and melodious. "What did she teach you, William Fletcher?" William met her gaze steadily. "She taught me that kindness is never wasted, your Highness. She taught me that we are all responsible for one another, that we cannot turn away from suffering simply because it is inconvenient. She taught me that honor matters more than comfort, and that a man's worth is measured not by his wealth or status, but by his willingness to stand for what is right." Isolde smiled, an expression that transformed her face from merely beautiful to radiant. She turned to her father. "Father, I believe we should help this boy and his mother. What harm can it do? Send a royal physician to examine the child. If his condition can be treated, provide the necessary medicine. Consider it an investment in the loyalty of your subjects." The king looked at his daughter with an expression that mixed exasperation and affection. "You have a soft heart, Isolde. It will be your undoing if you are not careful. Better a soft heart than a hard one," Isolde replied without hesitation. "A king who cannot show mercy is no better than a tyrant. Is that the legacy you wish to leave?" For a moment father and daughter locked gazes, engaged in a silent battle of wills. Finally, King Edward sighed and shook his head. "Very well. Aldrich, summon Master Godfrey. Have him take his supplies and accompany this young man to the eastern quarter. He is to examine the boy and provide whatever treatment is necessary. The crown will bear the expense." William felt as if the weight of the world had been lifted from his shoulders. He dropped to one knee, overcome with gratitude. "Thank you, your Majesty. Thank you, your Highness. You have saved a boy's life today, and his mother will bless your names for the rest of her days." "Rise, William Fletcher," the king said, though his tone had softened slightly, "and when you return to your neighborhood, remember what you have witnessed here today. Remember that while I cannot help every person who suffers, I do not turn away from those who ask for mercy in good faith. Now go, before I change my mind." William stood and bowed again, then turned to follow Aldrich from the hall. But as he reached the doors, he glanced back over his shoulder. Princess Isolde was watching him, her amber eyes thoughtful and her lips curved in a small smile. Their eyes met for just a moment, and William felt something shift in his chest, something he could not quite name, but that filled him with a strange mixture of warmth and longing. Then he was through the doors and back in the corridor, and Aldrich was leading him toward another part of the palace. Within minutes, they had located Master Godfrey, the royal physician, a man of perhaps 50 years, with a kindly face and gentle hands. He listened to William's description of Thomas's condition, then quickly gathered a leather satchel filled with various bottles, pouches, and instruments. "We must hurry," Godfrey said, his voice calm but urgent. "From what you describe, the boy may have inflammation of the lungs or perhaps a weakness of the heart. Either condition can be deadly if not treated promptly." They left the palace through a side entrance, where a servant waited with 2 horses already saddled. William had ridden before, though not often, and he mounted the sturdy gelding with only slight awkwardness. Godfrey, clearly an experienced rider, swung into his saddle with ease. Together they rode through the streets of London, the crowds parting before them when they saw the royal physician's distinctive robes. The journey that had taken William over an hour on foot took less than half that time on horseback. As they entered the poor quarter, William's anxiety returned in full force. What if they were too late? What if Thomas had already succumbed while he was pleading his case to the king? But when they rounded the final corner and the small crowd came into view, William saw that Thomas still lay in the street, his head still cradled in his mother's lap. Beatrice looked up as they approached, and the hope that blazed in her eyes was almost painful to witness. William dismounted and rushed to her side. "I brought help, Beatrice. This is Master Godfrey, the king's own physician. He is here by royal command to treat Thomas." Beatrice stared at Master Godfrey as if he were an apparition, something too wonderful to be real. Tears streamed down her face, carving new paths through the dirt and grime that had accumulated over hours of sitting in the street, cradling her dying son. Her lips moved, but no sound emerged at first. Finally she managed to whisper, "The king sent you." "Truly?" Godfrey knelt beside Thomas with practiced efficiency, his experienced eyes already assessing the boy's condition. "His Majesty commanded that I provide whatever treatment is necessary," he said, his voice gentle but focused. He placed his fingers against Thomas's neck, counting the pulse, then lifted one of the boy's eyelids to examine his eyes. "How long has he been like this?" "Since this morning," Beatrice said, her voice trembling. "He was walking beside me, talking about finding work, and then he just fell. He hasn't opened his eyes since. His breathing keeps getting weaker." Godfrey nodded, his expression grave but not without hope. He opened his leather satchel and began removing various items. Small glass bottles filled with liquids of different colors, cloth pouches that released pungent herbal scents when opened, a polished metal instrument that looked like a small trumpet. The physician pressed this instrument against Thomas's chest, listening intently to the sounds from within. William stood close by, watching every movement with intense focus. The crowd that had gathered throughout the morning pressed closer, curious about this royal physician who had appeared in their midst. Margaret, the elderly woman who had stayed with Beatrice all this time, clutched her shawl tighter and muttered a prayer under her breath. "The boy's heart is weak," Godfrey announced after several minutes of examination. "But it still fights. His lungs show signs of fluid accumulation, which explains the difficulty breathing. This is a condition I have seen before, particularly in children who have endured prolonged malnutrition and exposure to cold. The body simply becomes too exhausted to continue functioning properly." "Can you save him?" Beatrice asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, can you save my son?" Godfrey looked at her with compassion in his eyes. "I can try, and I have treatments that have proven effective in similar cases. But I must be honest with you. The boy is very weak. The next few hours will be critical. We need to get him somewhere warm and dry, somewhere he can rest comfortably while I administer the medicines." Beatrice's face crumpled. "We have no home suitable for such care. Our room is barely large enough for the 2 of us, and it is cold and damp. The roof leaks when it rains, and there is no proper bed, only straw pallets on the floor." William spoke up immediately. "Take him to the forge where I work. Master Edmund is a good man. He has a room above the shop that is warm from the fires below, and it is clean and dry. I am certain he will allow Thomas to stay there while he recovers." Godfrey nodded approvingly. "That would be acceptable. The warmth from the forge will actually be beneficial for his condition. Very well. Let us move him now, carefully. William, you are strong. Can you carry the boy? Of course, William said without hesitation. He bent down and gently slid his arms beneath Thomas's thin body, lifting him as if he weighed nothing at all. The boy's head lolled against William's chest, and his breathing remained shallow and labored, but he was still alive. That was all that mattered. They formed a small procession through the narrow streets. William led the way, carrying Thomas with as much care as if he were made of glass. Beatrice walked beside him, one hand resting on her son's arm, unwilling to lose physical contact with him, even for a moment. Godfrey followed close behind, his satchel clutched firmly, ready to provide immediate aid if Thomas's condition worsened. Margaret and several other neighbors trailed after them, unwilling to miss the conclusion of this extraordinary event. The forge where William worked was located in a slightly better part of the poor quarter, closer to the merchant district. The building was sturdy stone on the ground floor, with timber framing above. Smoke rose steadily from the chimney, and even from outside they could hear the rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil. Master Edmund was at work, as he always was during daylight hours. William pushed through the door with his shoulder, careful not to jostle Thomas. The heat from the forge fires hit them immediately, a welcome relief from the cold outside. Master Edmund, a bear of a man with massive shoulders and arms like tree trunks, looked up from the horseshoe he was shaping. His face, blackened with soot and sweat, registered surprise at the unusual sight. "William, what is the meaning of this?" Edmund's voice was gruff, but not unkind. He was in his late 40s with graying hair and a thick beard, and he had taken William on as an apprentice 3 years ago when the boy had desperately needed work. "Master Edmund, I beg your forgiveness for the interruption," William said quickly. "This is Thomas, the son of Beatrice, who has shown me great kindness. He collapsed in the street this morning and cannot rise. By the king's own command, Master Godfrey, the royal physician, has come to treat him. But the boy needs a warm, dry place to recover. I hoped you might allow him to use the room above the shop, just for a few days until he is strong enough to return home." Edmund set down his hammer and wiped his hands on his leather apron. He looked at Thomas's pale face, at Beatrice's desperate eyes, at the royal physician with his fine robes and expensive satchel. His expression softened. "The king sent his own physician to help a poor boy. That is something I never thought to see in my lifetime." He nodded firmly. "Of course the boy may use the room. Take him up now. My wife keeps it clean and ready for travelers, though we have had none in recent weeks. There is a proper bed with warm blankets, and a brazier we can light if more heat is needed." "Thank you," Beatrice said, her voice breaking. "Thank you so much. I do not know how I will ever repay such kindness." "No repayment is necessary," Edmund said gruffly. "Just help your boy get well. That will be payment enough." William carried Thomas up the narrow stairs to the room above. It was small but comfortable, with a real bed covered in thick wool blankets, a wooden table and 2 chairs, and a window that looked out over the street. Godfrey directed William to lay Thomas gently on the bed, then immediately set about arranging his supplies on the table. "Everyone except the mother must leave," Godfrey said firmly. "I need space to work, and the boy needs quiet. William, you have done well today. Your dedication to helping this family speaks highly of your character. But now you must return to your duties and let me attend to my patient." William hesitated, reluctant to leave, but he understood the physician's reasoning. He looked at Beatrice, who gave him a tremulous smile. "You saved him, William. Whatever happens now, you gave my son a chance at life. I will never forget what you have done for us today." William felt his throat tighten with emotion. He reached out and squeezed her hand briefly, then turned and left the room, closing the door quietly behind him. As he descended the stairs, he found Master Edmund waiting for him, along with Margaret and the other neighbors who had followed them. "You did a brave thing today, boy," Edmund said, his gruff voice touched with approval. "Riding all the way to the palace, demanding an audience with the king himself. That took courage." "I only did what needed to be done," William said quietly. "Beatrice has been kind to me. I could not stand by and do nothing while her son died in the street." Margaret stepped forward and patted his arm with her gnarled hand. "You are a good man, William Fletcher. Your parents would be proud of the man you have become." She turned to the others. "Come, we should return to our homes and let the physician work. We can check on the boy's progress later." The neighbors dispersed slowly, still talking in excited whispers about the extraordinary events of the day. Edmund returned to his forge, gesturing for William to follow. "The fire needs tending," he said, "and I have 3 more horseshoes to complete before sunset. Work will help take your mind off your worries." William nodded and picked up the bellows, pumping air into the coals until they glowed bright orange. The familiar rhythm of forge work was indeed comforting, requiring enough concentration to keep his mind from spiraling into anxiety about Thomas's condition. He and Edmund worked side by side in companionable silence, the clang of hammer on anvil providing a steady counterpoint to the roar of the flames. Hours passed. The light outside the forge windows gradually dimmed as afternoon gave way to evening. Finally, as Edmund was banking the fires for the night, they heard footsteps on the stairs. Both men turned to see Godfrey descending, his face tired but bearing a cautiously optimistic expression. "The boy lives," Godfrey announced without preamble. "His condition has stabilized. I have administered medicines to strengthen his heart and clear the fluid from his lungs. He opened his eyes about an hour ago and was able to take some water and thin broth. He is not out of danger yet, but I believe he will survive if he continues to improve at this rate." Relief flooded through William with such intensity that he had to steady himself against the workbench. "Thank God," he breathed. "Thank you, Master Godfrey. You have saved his life." "I have done my duty," Godfrey said simply. "But the boy will require continued care. I will return tomorrow to check on his progress and provide more medicine. In the meantime, he must rest and be kept warm. His mother should encourage him to drink water frequently, and he may eat light broths and soft bread if he feels hungry. No heavy foods for at least a week. I will make sure Beatrice understands," William said. "Is there anything else we should know?" Godfrey considered for a moment. The boy's collapse was brought on by exhaustion, poor nutrition, and exposure to cold. These are conditions that will recur if his circumstances do not improve. He needs regular meals, warm clothing, and shelter from the elements. Without these things, he will remain weak and vulnerable to illness. Edmund spoke up. "The boy can work here at the forge, once he is recovered. I can always use another pair of hands, and the work will help him build his strength. I will pay him a fair wage, enough to help his mother put food on the table. That would be most beneficial," Godfrey said, nodding his approval. He looked at William. "You have good friends, young man. Value them." He gathered his satchel and prepared to leave. "I will return at the same time tomorrow. Send word to the palace if the boy's condition worsens before then." After Godfrey departed, William went back upstairs to check on Thomas and Beatrice. He found them in the small room, Thomas now propped up slightly on pillows, his eyes open and aware, though still shadowed with exhaustion. Beatrice sat beside the bed, holding her son's hand and crying softly, tears of relief rather than despair. "William," Thomas said, his voice weak but clear, "Mother told me what you did. You went to the king himself for me." William pulled one of the chairs close to the bed and sat down. "I could not let you die, Thomas. You and your mother have been family to me when I had none. This was the least I could do." "The king sent his own physician," Thomas said, wonder evident in his voice despite his weakness. "I never thought such a thing was possible. I thought kings only cared about nobles and rich merchants." "King Edward cares about all his subjects," William said, "but it was Princess Isolde who truly convinced him to help you. She argued that showing mercy to those in need was the mark of a true king, not a tyrant." Beatrice looked up, her eyes red from crying but shining with gratitude. "I wish I could thank her personally. I wish I could tell her what her kindness means to us. Perhaps one day you will have that chance," William said, though he privately doubted it. The gulf between a princess and a poor woman was vast, unlikely to ever be bridged. Still, stranger things had happened today than he would have thought possible this morning. They talked quietly for a while longer, until Thomas's eyelids began to droop with exhaustion. Beatrice insisted that William return to his own small room to rest, promising that she would send for him if anything changed during the night. Reluctantly, William agreed. He was indeed exhausted, the events of the day having drained him both physically and emotionally. As he lay on his own straw pallet that night, in the tiny room he rented in a building 2 streets away from the forge, William found his thoughts returning not to Thomas or Beatrice, but to Princess Isolde. He remembered the way she had looked at him, the intelligence and compassion in her amber eyes, the graceful way she moved, the melodious quality of her voice. He remembered how she had stood up to her father, arguing for mercy and justice without hesitation or fear. She was everything beautiful and good in the world, and she was so far above him that he might as well be looking at the stars. A princess and a blacksmith's apprentice. The very idea of any connection between them was absurd, impossible, laughable, and yet he could not stop thinking about her, could not stop remembering the small smile she had given him as he left the throne room, the way their eyes had met for that brief, charged moment. He told himself he was being foolish, that exhaustion and the stress of the day were making him imagine things that did not exist. But even as he finally drifted into sleep, her image remained vivid in his mind, as if burned there by something stronger than mere memory. In the palace across the city, Princess Isolde stood at her chamber window, looking out over the lights of London. She wore a sleeping gown of soft linen, and her auburn hair fell loose around her shoulders, freed from its usual constraints. Her ladies-in-waiting had retired for the evening, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She found herself thinking about the blacksmith's apprentice who had appeared in the throne room that morning, William Fletcher. There had been something compelling about him, something that went beyond his striking physical appearance. It was the fierce determination in his eyes, the eloquent way he had spoken despite his humble origins, the obvious depth of his loyalty and compassion. These were qualities she valued highly, and they were rare enough among the nobles who populated her father's court, much less among common laborers. She had watched him throughout the brief audience, noting the strength evident in his frame, the calluses on his hands that spoke of hard work, the way he had met her father's gaze without flinching despite the obvious disparity in their stations. And when he had spoken about the woman who had taught him that kindness was never wasted, that honor mattered more than comfort, she had felt something stir within her. Recognition, perhaps. A sense of meeting someone who understood the world as she did, who valued the same things she valued. It was absurd, of course. She was a princess, daughter of the king, expected to marry some foreign prince or powerful noble to cement political alliances. Her father had been pushing her to accept one of the many proposals she had received, growing increasingly frustrated with her continued refusals. But Isolde had not spent 22 years learning statecraft and history and the art of governance only to become some man's broodmare, valued only for the heirs she could produce. She wanted more than that. She wanted a partnership, a true meeting of minds and hearts. She wanted someone who would see her as an equal, not a prize to be won or a tool to be used. And if she was honest with herself, she wanted someone who would make her feel the way she had felt when William Fletcher looked at her with those intense blue eyes. The days that followed brought a gradual transformation to Thomas's condition. Master Godfrey visited each morning as promised, checking the boy's progress and adjusting his treatments accordingly. By the third day, Thomas was able to sit up without assistance and speak in full sentences without becoming winded. By the fifth day, he was taking short walks around the room, supported by his mother's arm. The color had returned to his cheeks, and the frightening blue tinge had vanished from his lips. William visited every evening after his work at the forge was complete. He would climb the stairs, his clothes still bearing the scent of smoke and hot metal, and spend an hour or two talking with Thomas and Beatrice. Sometimes he brought food that Master Edmund's wife had prepared, thick stews and fresh bread that helped restore Thomas's strength. Other times he simply sat and listened as Thomas talked about his dreams for the future, now that he had been given a second chance at life. Master Edmund says I can start working at the forge as soon as Master Godfrey declares me fit, Thomas said one evening, his eyes bright with excitement. He says I can learn the trade properly, become more than just someone who hauls coal and water. He says I have clever hands and a good eye for detail. That is wonderful news, William said warmly. Edmund is an excellent teacher. He has been patient with me, and I know he will be the same with you. The work is hard, but it is honest, and there is satisfaction in creating something useful with your own hands. Beatrice reached over and squeezed William's hand. This is all because of you. None of this would have been possible if you had not gone to the king that day. You risked everything, demanding an audience, speaking so boldly. You could have been turned away, or worse, punished for your presumption. But you did it anyway, for us. William felt his face grow warm with embarrassment. I only did what anyone would have done in my place. No, Beatrice said firmly. Most people would have offered their sympathy and then gone about their business. You took action. You refused to accept that Thomas's life was worth less simply because we are poor. That is the mark of a truly good man, William Fletcher, and I pray that you will be rewarded for your kindness. As William walked back to his own room that night, He reflected on Beatrice's words. He did not feel particularly heroic or noble. He had simply done what his conscience demanded, what felt right in the moment. The thought that he might deserve some reward had never crossed his mind. Saving Thomas's life was reward enough. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. 2 days later, as William was working at the forge, hammering out a length of iron that would eventually become part of a gate for a merchant's house, a commotion in the street caught his attention. He looked up to see a group of riders approaching, their horses finely bred and their livery marking them as royal servants. At the head of the group rode a man William recognized as Lord Chamberlain Aldrich, the same official who had admitted him to the throne room a week earlier. Master Edmund set down his tools and walked to the forge entrance, wiping his hands on his apron. William followed, his heart suddenly beating faster with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Had something gone wrong? Was the king displeased with the way his physician's services had been used? Aldrich dismounted with practiced ease and approached them. "I seek William Fletcher, apprentice blacksmith," he announced formally. "I am William Fletcher," William said, stepping forward. "How may I serve you, my lord?" Aldrich studied him for a moment, then pulled a sealed document from inside his cloak. "I bear a summons from His Majesty King Edward. You are commanded to present yourself at the palace tomorrow at the 10th hour. A horse will be provided for your transport." William stared at the document, confusion evident on his face. "A summons? Have I done something wrong, my lord? Has the king taken offense at something I said or did?" A slight smile tugged at the corner of Aldrich's mouth. "On the contrary, His Majesty wishes to reward you for your loyal service and compassion toward your fellow subjects. The details will be explained tomorrow. See that you present yourself promptly and in your best clothes, such as they are." He glanced at William's soot-stained tunic and breeches, though perhaps a visit to the bathhouse would not be amiss beforehand. With that, Aldrich remounted his horse and led his group back toward the palace district, leaving William standing in the street with the sealed summons in his hand, too stunned to speak. Master Edmund clapped him on the shoulder with enough force to nearly knock him off his feet. "Well, boy, it seems your good deed has not gone unnoticed in high places. The king wishes to reward you personally. That is a great honor." "I do not want a reward," William protested. "I did not help Thomas expecting payment or recognition. I did it because it was right." "That may be so," Edmund said, his expression serious now. "But when a king summons you, you go. To refuse would be an insult. Accept whatever reward he offers graciously, thank him for his generosity, and conduct yourself with dignity. You represent not just yourself, but all of us in this neighborhood. Show the nobles that common folk can be just as honorable and well-spoken as they are." William nodded slowly, understanding the weight of Edmund's words. "I will do my best not to shame you or myself." That evening, William told Thomas and Beatrice about the summons. Thomas was thrilled, bouncing on the bed with excitement despite his mother's warnings to be careful. "You are going to meet the king again, and the princess too, perhaps. You must tell us everything that happens." Beatrice was more measured in her response, but William could see the pride shining in her eyes. "You deserve recognition for what you have done. Accept the king's gratitude with humility, and remember that you will always have a home and family here with us, no matter what honors may come your way." The next morning, William rose before dawn and made his way to the public bathhouse. He scrubbed away a week's worth of forge dirt and soot, then dressed in his one good set of clothes, a tunic of dark brown wool that was worn but clean, a pair of breeches that had been carefully mended, and his best boots, which he had spent an hour the previous evening cleaning and oiling until they shone. He tied his dark hair back with a leather cord and examined his reflection in a polished piece of metal that served as a mirror. He would never be mistaken for a nobleman, but at least he looked respectable. A royal servant arrived precisely at the appointed time with a horse for William to ride. The journey to the palace seemed to pass in a blur. William's mind raced with possibilities about what the king might say, what reward he might offer. Money seemed most likely, perhaps a purse of gold coins that would help him establish his own forge someday. Or perhaps a royal commendation, a document declaring him to be under the king's protection. When they arrived at the palace, William was led not to the great hall where he had been before, but to a smaller, more intimate chamber. The room was still magnificent by his standards, with rich tapestries on the walls and a fire crackling in an enormous hearth, but it felt less formal, more suited to private conversations than state business. King Edward sat in a high-backed chair near the fire, dressed more simply than he had been during the public audience. He wore a tunic of deep green wool with minimal decoration, and his crown was absent, replaced by a simple circlet of gold. Standing beside him, her hand resting lightly on the back of his chair, was Princess Isolde. William's breath caught in his throat at the sight of her. She wore a gown of deep crimson wool, the color making her auburn hair seem to glow like flames in the firelight. The bodice was embroidered with golden thread in intricate patterns, and a belt of worked gold encircled her slender waist. Her hair was partially bound back with golden pins, but loose curls framed her face, softening the regal lines of her features. She was even more beautiful than he remembered, and he found himself momentarily unable to move or speak. "Approach, William Fletcher," the king said, his voice carrying authority even in the more casual setting. William forced his legs to move, crossing the room and bowing low before the king. "Your Majesty, Your Highness, I am honored to answer your summons." "Rise," King Edward commanded. William straightened, keeping his gaze respectfully lowered. "I have summoned you here to acknowledge the service you rendered to one of my subjects. Master Godfrey reports that the boy, Thomas, is recovering well and will make a full return to health. This outcome is entirely due to your quick action and determination. I am grateful that Thomas is recovering, Your Majesty," William said carefully. "But I did nothing more than any decent person would do when faced with another's suffering." Isolde spoke up, her melodious voice filling the chamber. "That is where you are wrong, William Fletcher. Most people would have offered sympathy and then continued about their business. You took action. You refused to accept that a child's life should be forfeit simply because his family lacks wealth. That is not common decency. That is exceptional character." William dared to lift his gaze to meet hers, and once again felt that strange jolt of connection when their eyes locked. "Your Highness is too kind. I only did what my conscience demanded." The king leaned forward in his chair, his gray eyes studying William intently. "Tell me, William Fletcher, what do you want from life? What are your ambitions, your dreams?" The question caught William off guard. He hesitated, unsure how honest he should be. Finally, he decided that anything less than the truth would be disrespectful. "I want to become a master blacksmith, Your Majesty. I want to have my own forge, to create works of beauty and utility that will outlast my own life. I want to be able to help people like Beatrice and Thomas, to ensure that no one in my neighborhood goes hungry or lacks for basic necessities. I want to live honorably, to be remembered as a good man who stood for what was right." King Edward nodded slowly, a slight smile playing at his lips. "Noble ambitions, and achievable ones for a man of your talents. Master Edmund speaks highly of your skill at the forge. He says you have the potential to become one of the finest craftsmen in London, given proper training and opportunity." "Master Edmund is generous in his praise," William said, feeling his face flush. "But I work hard to deserve his good opinion." "Hard work is an admirable quality," the king said. "It is also a quality that has become increasingly rare among the nobility. Too many young lords spend their days in idleness, concerned only with hunting and feasting and the latest court gossip. They have forgotten that leadership requires service, that privilege carries responsibility." Isolde moved from behind her father's chair, walking closer to William. He could smell the faint scent of roses that clung to her hair, could see the delicate freckles that dusted her cheekbones. "My father and I have discussed how best to reward you for your service," she said. "We considered offering you gold, but that seems inadequate. Money can be spent and forgotten. We wanted to give you something of more lasting value." William's heart was pounding so hard he was sure they could hear it. Being this close to Isolde was doing strange things to his ability to think clearly. "Your Highness, I require no reward. Knowing that Thomas lives and will thrive is reward enough. Nevertheless, you will accept what we offer," the king said, his tone brooking no argument. "I am establishing a new position within the royal household. You will become the king's smith, responsible for creating and maintaining all metalwork for the palace. You will have your own forge within the palace grounds, with apprentices and assistants as you require. You will receive a generous salary, quarters within the palace, and the title of Master Smith, regardless of your age or the normal requirements of the guild." William felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. His own forge, within the palace itself, a royal appointment. It was more than he had ever dreamed possible, more than he could have imagined even in his most ambitious fantasies. "Your Majesty, I do not know what to say. This is too generous. I am not worthy of such an honor. That is not for you to decide, King Edward said firmly. I have made my decision. Do you accept the position? William struggled to find words. Yes, Your Majesty. I accept with profound gratitude. I will work every day to prove myself worthy of your trust. Good. The king stood and William immediately dropped to one knee. You will begin your new duties in 1 week's time. That should give you sufficient opportunity to settle your affairs with Master Edmund and make the necessary arrangements. Aldrich will provide you with all the details you require. Thank you, Your Majesty, William said, his voice thick with emotion. I will not disappoint you. See that you do not. The king moved toward the door, then paused and looked back. Oh, and William, my daughter specifically requested that you be given this opportunity. She believes you have the character and integrity that the palace has been sorely lacking. I trust her judgment in such matters. Do not prove her wrong. With that, King Edward left the chamber, leaving William alone with Princess Isolde. William rose slowly to his feet, acutely aware of the impropriety of the situation. A common man should not be left alone with a princess, even for a moment. But Isolde did not seem concerned with propriety. She moved to stand directly in front of him, so close he could have reached out and touched her if he dared. You are wondering why I spoke up for you, Isolde said softly. It was not a question. You are wondering what interest a princess could possibly have in a blacksmith's apprentice. The thought had crossed my mind, Your Highness, William admitted. You have shown me kindness beyond measure, and I do not understand why. Isolde smiled, and the expression transformed her face into something that made William's heart ache. Perhaps I see something in you that others miss. Perhaps I recognize a kindred spirit, someone who understands that true nobility has nothing to do with birth or title, but with how we treat those who can offer us nothing in return. Your Highness speaks as if we are equals, William said carefully, but we both know that is not true. You are a princess, daughter of the king. I am the son of a blacksmith who died leaving nothing but debts. The gulf between us is vast. Is it? Isolde took a step closer, and William felt his breath catch. I was born in a palace, yes. I wear silk and jewels. I will never know hunger or cold or true hardship. But what good is any of that if I am not free to choose my own path? What value is there in a crown if it becomes a cage? William understood then what she was not quite saying, and the realization terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. Your Highness, Isolde, she interrupted. When we are alone, you may call me Isolde. I would hear my name spoken by someone who sees me as a person, not as a title or a political asset. William felt as if the world had tilted on its axis. He was standing in a private chamber with Princess Isolde, who had just asked him to call her by her given name. Every instinct screamed at him that this was dangerous, that he was venturing into territory where a man of his station had no right to tread. And yet, when he looked into her amber eyes, he saw not the cold calculation of nobility, but genuine warmth, a reaching out from one lonely soul to another. Isolde, he said softly, testing the feel of her name on his tongue. It felt like silk and honey, like something precious that should be handled with care. I am honored by your trust. But I must speak plainly, even at the risk of offending you. What is happening between us, whatever this is, it cannot end well. You know this as surely as I do. Isolde's expression grew serious, though the warmth in her eyes did not diminish. I know what you are thinking, that I am naive, that I do not understand the realities of court politics and royal marriages, that I am playing with fire and will inevitably be burned. She moved to the window, her crimson gown flowing behind her like liquid flame. But I am not as sheltered as you might believe. I have spent my entire life learning the ways of power, watching how alliances are formed and broken, seeing how women are traded like livestock to cement political agreements. And I have decided that I will not accept such a fate without a fight. William followed her to the window, maintaining a respectful distance but close enough that he could speak without being overheard if anyone should pass by the chamber door. Your father is the king. He will expect you to marry someone who can bring advantage to the realm, a prince from a neighboring kingdom, or perhaps a powerful duke who commands vast armies, not a blacksmith's apprentice with nothing to his name but calloused hands and a borrowed horse. My father is a good man who wants me to be happy, Isolde said, though her tone suggested she was trying to convince herself as much as him. He has given me more freedom than most princesses enjoy. He allowed me to refuse 3 marriage proposals that I found distasteful. He includes me in council meetings, seeks my opinion on matters of state. He respects my mind. But there are limits to that respect, William said gently. There must be. He is not just your father. He is the king. His duty to the realm must come before his personal desires, and yours as well. Isolde turned to face him, and he was surprised to see tears glistening in her eyes. Do you think I do not know that? Do you think I have not lain awake countless nights wrestling with the conflict between duty and desire? She took a shaky breath. I am 22 years old, William. In 2 years I will reach an age where my marriage ability begins to decline. The pressure on my father to arrange a match grows stronger with each passing season. Soon he will have no choice but to insist, and I will have no choice but to comply. Then why? William asked, his voice rough with emotion. Why seek me out? Why give me hope for something that can never be? Would it not be kinder to maintain the distance that our stations demand? Perhaps it would, Isolde admitted. But I am tired of being kind when it means denying my own heart. I am tired of pretending that duty is enough to fill the emptiness inside me. When I saw you in the throne room that day, when I heard you speak about honor and kindness and standing for what is right, something awakened in me. Something that had been sleeping for so long I had almost forgotten it existed. William felt his resistance crumbling. He wanted to maintain his principles, to insist that pursuing any connection with Isolde would be folly. But the raw honesty in her voice, the vulnerability she was showing him, made it impossible to turn away. What do you want from me? He asked quietly. What can I possibly give you that you do not already have? See me, Isolde said simply. Not as a princess, not as a political asset, but as a woman. Talk to me as an equal. Let me experience what it means to be valued for who I am, rather than what I represent. Is that so much to ask? It is everything to ask, William said, and it is something I cannot refuse you, even though I know I should. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and gently took her hand. Her skin was soft and warm against his calloused palm. But you must understand the risk. If anyone discovers that we have formed an attachment, the consequences will fall far more heavily on me than on you. I could be imprisoned or worse, and your reputation would be damaged, your future prospects harmed. I know the risks, Isolde said, her fingers tightening around his, and I accept them. We will be careful, discreet. Your position as the King's Smith will give us legitimate reasons to interact. We can meet to discuss designs for palace metalwork, to inspect the forge, to review completed projects. No one will think anything of it. William wanted to believe her, but he had lived too long among common folk not to understand how quickly gossip spread, how sharp-eyed servants noticed every glance and gesture. Still, looking at Isolde's hopeful face, feeling the warmth of her hand in his, he found himself willing to take the risk. Perhaps he was a fool, but she was right about one thing. Life was too short to deny your heart simply because the path ahead was difficult. Very well, he said softly. I will be your friend, your confidant, whatever you need me to be. But Isolde, you must promise me something in return. If the danger becomes too great, if your father begins to suspect, you must be willing to step away. Your safety and future are more important than whatever comfort I can provide. I promise, Isolde said, though William suspected it was a promise she had no intention of keeping. She released his hand reluctantly, putting proper distance between them once more. You should go now, before someone comes looking for me. But William, thank you, for seeing me, for being honest, for giving me hope that there might be more to life than duty and obligation. William bowed formally, though his eyes never left hers. The honor is entirely mine, Your Highness. He used her title deliberately, reminding them both of the reality they could not escape. Then he turned and left the chamber, his heart pounding and his mind reeling from everything that had just transpired. The week that followed was a whirlwind of activity. William had to inform Master Edmund of his new position, a conversation that was both proud and melancholic. Edmund was genuinely happy for his apprentice's advancement, but he would miss William's strong back and steady hands. They agreed that William would help train Edmund's new apprentice before taking up his royal duties, ensuring a smooth transition. Thomas, now well enough to move about freely, was overjoyed by William's news. You will live in the palace, he exclaimed. You will see the king and princess every day. You must tell me everything, every detail of palace life. I will visit regularly, William promised. And you must write to me about your progress at the forge. Master Edmund tells me you are learning quickly. Beatrice embraced William tightly, tears streaming down her face. You have been like a son to me, she said. I am so proud of the man you have become, and I know your parents would be proud as well. Never forget where you came from, William. Never forget the people who care about you, no matter how high you rise. I could never forget, William assured her. This neighborhood, these people, you and Thomas, you are my family. A royal appointment does not change that. On the appointed day, William moved his few possessions to the palace. He was given quarters in a section of the palace reserved for skilled artisans and craftsmen, far from the grand halls where the nobility resided, but still more luxurious than anything he had known. His room had a real bed with a feather mattress, a writing desk, a wardrobe for clothes, and a window that looked out over the palace gardens. A servant brought him fresh water each morning and took away his laundry to be cleaned. It was almost overwhelming. The forge itself was a masterpiece. It occupied a stone building in the palace courtyard, with high ceilings to vent the smoke and heat, multiple workstations and tools of the finest quality. There were stores of iron, steel, bronze, and even small quantities of silver and gold for decorative work. 2 young apprentices were assigned to assist him, and both regarded him with a mixture of respect and curiosity. They had expected an old master craftsman, not a man barely older than themselves. William threw himself into his work with fierce dedication. He needed to prove that he deserved this position, that King Edward's faith in him had not been misplaced. He spent long hours at the forge, creating hinges and locks, decorative grills and candle holders, anything that might be needed for palace maintenance or improvement. His apprentices quickly learned that their new master demanded excellence but was willing to teach and explain rather than simply bark orders. 3 days into his tenure, Isolde visited the forge for the first time. She arrived in the late morning, accompanied by 2 ladies-in-waiting and a guard. William's apprentices immediately stopped working and bowed low, clearly uncomfortable with the princess's presence. William set down his hammer and wiped his hands on his leather apron before bowing as well. "Your Highness," he said formally, "how may I serve you?" Isolde's eyes sparkled with amusement at his careful tone. "I wish to commission a new gate for the garden," she said, her voice carrying the imperious note expected of royalty. "Something beautiful but functional, with decorative elements that reflect the changing seasons. Can you create such a thing?" "Of course, Your Highness," William said, "but I would need to see the location and take measurements. Perhaps Your Highness would do me the honor of showing me where the gate is to be installed." "Very well," Isolde agreed. She turned to her ladies-in-waiting. "You may wait here. This will not take long." The guard looked uncertain, but did not protest as Isolde led William out of the forge and into the garden. Once they were out of earshot, walking along a gravel path between beds of herbs and late-blooming roses, Isolde's formal demeanor melted away. "I could not wait any longer to see you," she said softly. "These past 3 days have felt like 3 years. You should not have come," William said, though he could not keep the warmth from his voice. "People will notice. They will talk." "Let them talk," Isolde said. "I am commissioning metalwork from the king's smith. There is nothing improper about that." She glanced at him sideways, a mischievous smile playing at her lips. "Though I confess I have no actual need for a garden gate. I simply wanted an excuse to spend time with you." William felt his heart swell with a dangerous mixture of joy and fear. "Isolde, we must be careful. Your reputation will survive a conversation about metalwork," Isolde finished. "William, I understand your caution, truly I do, but I refuse to live in fear of every glance and whisper. We are doing nothing wrong. Not yet, anyway." They walked in silence for a moment, the garden peaceful around them. Despite the late autumn season, the palace gardeners had managed to coax a few flowers into bloom, their colors bright against the gray stone walls. William found himself acutely aware of Isolde beside him, the rustle of her skirts, the warmth of her presence, the faint scent of roses that seemed to follow her everywhere. "Tell me about your work," Isolde said. "Are you settling in well? Do the apprentices respect you?" "They are adjusting," William said. "I think they expected someone older, more experienced, but they are good lads, eager to learn. I am teaching them that true craftsmanship requires patience and attention to detail, that rushing leads to poor results." My father was right about you, Isolde said. You have the temperament of a teacher as well as a craftsman. These are valuable qualities. They reached a secluded corner of the garden where a stone bench sat beneath an ancient oak tree. Isolde glanced around to ensure they were alone, then sat down, gesturing for William to join her. He hesitated only a moment before complying, though he maintained a respectful distance between them. I need to tell you something, Isolde said, her expression growing serious. My father received a letter yesterday from the Duke of Normandy. His son, Prince Philippe, will be visiting London next month. The official reason is to discuss trade agreements, but everyone knows the real purpose. He is coming to court me. William felt as if someone had driven a spike through his chest. I see, he managed to say, his voice carefully neutral. And what do you think of this Prince Philippe? I have never met him, Isolde admitted. But I have heard he is handsome, educated, skilled in warfare and diplomacy. Everything a princess should want in a husband. She looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. Everything except the one thing that truly matters. Which is? William asked, though he thought he knew the answer. The ability to see me as I truly am, Isolde said. The willingness to value my mind and spirit as much as my royal blood. Philippe will see a prize to be won, a valuable alliance to be secured. He will not see Isolde, the woman who reads philosophy late into the night, who argues with her father's counselors about justice and governance, who dreams of a world where birth matters less than character. William wanted to reach out and take her hand, to offer comfort, but he did not dare. Perhaps you are judging him unfairly. Perhaps he will surprise you. Perhaps, Isolde said, but her tone suggested she did not believe it. In any case, I will have to receive him courteously, allow him to court me properly. My father will insist. He has been patient with my refusals, but his patience is not infinite. Then we should end this now, William said, the words tasting like ashes in his mouth, before either of us becomes more attached than we already are. You will marry your prince, and I will remain here as the king's smith, and we will both do our duty. Isolde turned to face him, her amber eyes blazing with defiance. No, I will not give up the one genuine connection I have found in this palace of political maneuvering and false smiles. I will receive Prince Philippe. I will be polite and gracious, but I will not make any promises, not until I have exhausted every other option. What other options? William asked. You are a princess. Your marriage will be arranged according to the needs of the kingdom, not the desires of your heart. Perhaps, Isolde said again, but I am also my father's daughter, and he has taught me well. There are always options, William. Always ways to influence outcomes, to steer events in the direction you prefer. I simply need time to figure out what those options are. The weeks that followed were a study in contrasts for William. His days were filled with honest labor at the forge, the familiar rhythm of hammer on anvil providing a welcome anchor in a life that had become increasingly complicated. He created gates and hinges, decorative metalwork for the great hall, and intricate locks for the treasury. His reputation as a skilled craftsman grew, and nobles began requesting his services for their own projects. He was respected, valued, and more prosperous than he had ever imagined possible. But his nights were restless, filled with thoughts of Isolde and the impossible situation they had created. They continued to meet under the guise of discussing various metalwork projects, always with servants or guards nearby to maintain propriety. But there were stolen moments, brief exchanges of words that meant more than they should, glances that lingered too long. William felt himself falling deeper with each encounter, even as his rational mind screamed warnings about the inevitable heartbreak ahead. Isolde, for her part, seemed determined to live in the present moment, refusing to acknowledge the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. She visited the forge regularly, always with some legitimate reason that could not be questioned. She commissioned a set of candle holders for her chambers, an ornate mirror frame, a decorative chest with an intricate locking mechanism. Each project gave them hours to spend together, talking about everything from philosophy to politics to their childhoods. William learned that Isolde's mother had died when she was 10 years old, leaving her to be raised primarily by tutors and governesses. Her father had loved his wife deeply, and her death had changed him, made him more cautious and protective of his only child. Isolde had responded by becoming fiercely independent, determined to prove that she was more than just a pretty face to be married off for political advantage. In turn, William told Isolde about his own parents, about his father's pride in his craft and his mother's gentle wisdom. He spoke of the poverty that had followed his father's death, of the hunger and fear that had defined his adolescence, of the kindness that people like Beatrice and Master Edmund had shown him when he had nothing to offer in return. Isolde listened with rapt attention, asking questions that showed she truly wanted to understand his world. One afternoon, as they sat in the garden reviewing sketches for a new set of gates, Isolde said suddenly, "Take me to the eastern quarter. I want to see where you lived, meet the people who shaped you." William looked at her in alarm. "That is impossible. A princess cannot simply walk through the poorest part of London. It would cause panic or worse, and the danger—" "I am not afraid of my own subjects," Isolde interrupted. "And I will not go as a princess. I will dress in simple clothes, cover my hair, wear no jewelry. Who would recognize me? I could be any merchant's daughter or minor noble's wife." "Anyone who has seen you would recognize you," William said firmly. "Your bearing, your speech, the way you move, everything about you proclaims your status. It is not something you can hide simply by changing your clothes." Isolde's expression turned stubborn, a look William had come to recognize as dangerous. "Then I will learn to hide it. You can teach me. Show me how to walk like a common woman, how to speak without the formal inflections I have been taught since childhood." "I am not without intelligence, William. I can learn." "Why?" William asked. "Why is this so important to you?" "Because I want to understand your world," Isolde said passionately. "I want to see the places that matter to you, meet the people you care about. How can I truly know you if I only see you within palace walls, where everything is artificial and constrained?" William understood her desire, even sympathized with it, but the risks were enormous. If Isolde were recognized, if anything happened to her while in his care, the consequences would be catastrophic. And yet, looking at her eager face, her amber eyes alight with determination, he found himself weakening. "If we were to do this," he said slowly, "it would require careful planning. We could not simply walk out the palace gates together. We would need a plausible reason for you to leave, a disguise that would withstand scrutiny, and someone we could trust to accompany us for protection. You are agreeing?" Isolde's face lit up with joy. "Truly, I am saying I will consider it," William corrected. "But Isolde, you must understand the danger. The eastern quarter is not the palace. There are thieves and cutthroats, people who would not hesitate to harm you if they thought they could profit from it. Even dressed as a common woman, your beauty would attract unwanted attention." "Then we will be careful," Isolde said. "We will go during daylight hours, stay in areas you know well, and leave at the first sign of trouble. Please, William, let me do this. Let me see the world through your eyes, just once." William knew he should refuse, knew that agreeing was reckless and foolish. But he also knew that Isolde would eventually find a way to do this with or without his help, and at least if he was involved, he could take precautions to keep her safe. "Very well," he said finally, "but we do this my way, with no arguments or objections." "Agreed?" "Agreed," Isolde said, her smile bright enough to rival the sun. They spent the next week planning the excursion with the care of generals preparing for battle. Isolde obtained simple clothing from one of her ladies-in-waiting, a woman named Catherine who was deeply loyal and could be trusted to keep secrets. William arranged to take a day away from the forge, citing the need to purchase supplies from merchants in the city. He also recruited Thomas, who had recovered fully and was now working alongside Master Edmund to act as an additional escort. Thomas was thrilled to be included in such an adventure, and William trusted him completely to keep Isolde safe. The day they chose was overcast and cool, typical weather for late autumn in London. Isolde left the palace in the early morning, dressed in her usual finery and accompanied by her ladies-in-waiting. They went to visit a church on the western edge of the city, a trip that was not unusual for the pious princess. But once inside the church, Isolde slipped away from her companions and met William in a small side chapel, where he had brought the common clothes she would wear. She changed quickly behind a carved wooden screen, emerging in a simple dress of brown wool, a thick shawl wrapped around her shoulders, and a cloth cap that covered most of her distinctive auburn hair. William had brought a small amount of soot from the forge, and he carefully rubbed it on her face and hands, dulling the aristocratic pallor of her skin and giving her the weathered look of someone who worked outdoors. "How do I look?" Isolde asked, turning so he could inspect her from all angles. "Like a woman who has known hard work," William said honestly. "But you must remember to slouch slightly, to make yourself smaller." Nobility stands tall and proud. Common folk learn to take up as little space as possible. And watch your language. Use simpler words. Drop some of the formal constructions. Can you do that? Isolde practiced for a few minutes, adjusting her posture and speech until William was satisfied that she could pass casual inspection. Then they left the church through a side door, where Thomas waited with 3 horses. He gaped when he saw Isolde in her disguise, barely recognizing her until William gestured impatiently for him to close his mouth. "This is madness," Thomas muttered as they rode through the city streets. "If the king discovers what we are doing, he will have all our heads. Then we must ensure he does not discover it," William said calmly. "Stay alert, Thomas. Watch for anyone paying us too much attention." They entered the eastern quarter through a narrow lane that William knew well. The contrast between the Palace District and this neighborhood was stark and immediate. The buildings here were cramped and poorly maintained, many with visible damage that would never be repaired. The streets were rutted and muddy, filled with refuse that no one bothered to clear. The people they passed were thin and haggard, their clothes patched and worn, their eyes carrying the wary look of those who had learned that life offered more pain than pleasure. William watched Isolde carefully, curious about how she would react to such raw poverty. To her credit, she did not flinch or show disgust. Instead, her expression grew thoughtful, almost sad, as she took in the living conditions of her father's poorest subjects. When a group of ragged children ran past, laughing despite their obvious hunger, she turned to William with tears glistening in her eyes. "This is how most of my father's subjects live?" she asked quietly. "In such desperation and want? Many live even worse than this," William said gently. "The eastern quarter is poor, but it is not the worst. There are places in London where the suffering is so severe that people die in the streets and no one bothers to remove their bodies for days." Isolde looked stricken. "How can this be? England is wealthy. The treasury is full. Why are these people not helped?" "Because the people who control the wealth do not see them as worthy of help," William said. "To most nobles, the poor are invisible. They exist only to provide labor and taxes. Their suffering is simply the natural order of things, not something that requires intervention or concern." They dismounted near the forge where William had worked, and immediately Beatrice came rushing out, drawn by the sound of familiar voices. She embraced William warmly, then turned her curious gaze on Isolde. "Who is your friend, William? I do not think I have seen her before." "This is Isabel," William said, using a variation of Isolde's name that would not draw attention. "She is a merchant's daughter from the Western District. She wanted to see where I worked before I went to the palace." Beatrice studied Isolde with the shrewd eyes of a woman who had survived decades of hardship. William could see her taking in the quality of the cloth beneath the dirt, the refined features that no amount of soot could truly disguise, the aristocratic bearing that Isolde could not completely suppress. But Beatrice said nothing, merely nodded and smiled. "Any friend of William's is welcome here. Come inside, all of you. I have just baked bread, and there is some cheese we can share." They spent an hour in Beatrice's small home, eating the simple food she offered and talking about everyday matters. Thomas told stories about his work at the forge, demonstrating the new skills he had learned. Beatrice asked Isolde careful questions about her life, and Isolde answered as truthfully as she could without revealing her true identity. William watched the interaction with a mixture of pride and anxiety, proud that Isolde was making such an effort to connect with his friends, but anxious about maintaining the deception. As they were preparing to leave, Beatrice pulled William aside. "She is someone important, is she not?" she said quietly. "Someone far above our station." William considered lying, but knew Beatrice would see through it. "Yes," he admitted, "but I cannot tell you more than that. Please, Beatrice, trust me." "No one can know she was here." Beatrice patted his arm gently. "I trust you, William. You have a good heart. But be careful. The powerful do not like it when boundaries are crossed, when the natural order is challenged. I would not see you hurt for the sake of a love that cannot be." "Who said anything about love?" William protested weakly. Beatrice smiled sadly. "I am old, not blind. I see the way you look at her, the way she looks at you. There is something between you, something that transcends station and circumstance. But that does not mean it can survive in the real world. Be careful, my dear boy. Guard your heart." They left Beatrice's home and spent the rest of the morning walking through the neighborhood. William showed Isolde the church where he had sometimes found shelter during the worst of his poverty. the well where people lined up each morning to draw water, the small market where vendors sold wilted vegetables and questionable meat at prices the desperate could barely afford. He introduced her to people he knew, carefully maintaining the fiction that she was a merchant's daughter, curious about how the poor lived. Isolde absorbed everything with an intensity that surprised William. She asked thoughtful questions, listened carefully to the answers, and made no judgments or criticisms. When they passed a woman with 3 small children, all of them painfully thin, Isolde stopped and spoke with her. She learned that the woman's husband had died in an accident at the docks, leaving the family with no income and no prospects. Before William could stop her, Isolde had pulled several coins from a hidden pocket and pressed them into the woman's hand. "Please," Isolde said softly. "For the children. Buy them bread and milk." The woman stared at the coins in shock. It was more money than she typically saw in a month. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched Isolde's hand. "Bless you, miss. Bless you and keep you safe. You have the heart of an angel." As they walked away, William said quietly, "That was risky. No merchant's daughter would carry that much coin in this neighborhood, and certainly would not give it away so freely." "I do not care," Isolde said fiercely. "Those children were starving, William. Starving, while I live in a palace with more food than I could eat in a lifetime. How can I see such suffering and do nothing?" "You cannot save everyone," William said gently. "The poverty here is too vast, too entrenched. A few coins will help that family today, but tomorrow they will still be poor, still struggling to survive. Then the system must change," Isolde said with sudden passion. "The distribution of wealth must be more equitable. There must be programs to help those who cannot help themselves, to ensure that no child goes hungry while the nobility feasts on delicacies. This is not right, William. This is not just." William felt his heart swell with love for this remarkable woman who refused to accept the world as it was, who wanted to make things better even when the task seemed impossible. "You sound like a revolutionary," he said, trying to lighten the mood. "Perhaps I am," Isolde said seriously. "Perhaps that is what England needs. Not a violent uprising, but a revolution of compassion, a fundamental rethinking of how we organize society. My father is a good king, but even he does not truly see the suffering of his poorest subjects. How can he, when he has spent his entire life in palaces, surrounded by wealth and comfort?" They returned to the church as the afternoon light began to fade, and Isolde changed back into her fine clothes. The transformation was startling. Within minutes, she had gone from a common woman to a princess once more, her bearing regal, her expression composed. But William could see that something had changed in her eyes, a new awareness, a deeper understanding of the world beyond palace walls. "Thank you," Isolde said as they prepared to part ways. "Thank you for showing me your world, for trusting me with something so precious. I will never forget what I saw today." "What will you do with this knowledge?" William asked. "How will it change things?" Isolde met his gaze steadily. "I do not know yet, but I promise you this. I will not simply return to my comfortable life and forget. I will find ways to help, to make a difference. And when I am in a position to influence policy, when I have real power, I will remember the faces I saw today, the suffering that exists just miles from my father's throne." Prince Philippe of Normandy arrived in London 3 weeks later with a retinue of 50 knights, a dozen advisors, and enough baggage to stock a small castle. His entrance into the city was a spectacle designed to impress, with banners flying and trumpets blaring. The prince himself riding a magnificent white stallion that must have cost more than most families in the Eastern Quarter would earn in 10 lifetimes. William watched from the palace courtyard as the procession passed, and even from a distance, he could see that Philippe was indeed everything rumor claimed. Tall and handsome, with golden hair and the bearing of a warrior prince. The prince's presence transformed the palace overnight. Suddenly there were elaborate feasts every evening, tournaments and hunts during the day, musical performances and poetry readings to showcase the cultural refinement of the English court. King Edward played the gracious host, while Isolde was forced to play the role of available princess, sitting beside Philippe at banquets, watching him compete in tournaments, listening to his stories of battles and diplomatic triumphs. William saw less of Isolde during this time, as propriety demanded that she focus her attention on her suitor. Their meetings at the forge ceased entirely, and when they did cross paths in the palace corridors, they could exchange only brief, formal greetings. The separation was agonizing for William, made worse by the knowledge that Isolde was being courted by a man who was, by all objective measures, far more suitable than a blacksmith could ever be. He threw himself into his work with almost desperate intensity, spending 14 or 15 hours a day at the forge. His apprentices worried that he was pushing himself too hard, but William found that exhausting his body helped quiet his mind, at least temporarily. He created increasingly elaborate pieces, pouring his frustration and longing into the metal, shaping it with a skill that bordered on artistry. One evening, as William was finally preparing to leave the forge, long after his apprentices had retired, Thomas appeared in the doorway. The boy had grown in the months since his illness, his frame filling out with proper food and steady work, his face losing the gaunt, haunted look that poverty had etched there. He carried a sealed letter, which he handed to William with an expression of concern. "A lady's maid gave this to me," Thomas said. "She said it was urgent that you receive it tonight, and that no one else should know of its delivery." William's heart began to race as he broke the seal and unfolded the letter. He recognized Isolde's elegant handwriting immediately. "William, I must speak with you. Come to the Tower Garden at midnight. Use the eastern stairs, where the guards do not patrol. Please, I am desperate. The situation has become impossible. The letter ended abruptly, as if Isolde had been interrupted while writing it. William read it 3 times, his anxiety growing with each reading. What had happened? What situation had become impossible? And what kind of danger was Isolde asking him to walk into by meeting her secretly at midnight? "Is everything all right?" Thomas asked, clearly worried by William's expression. "I do not know," William admitted. He looked at the boy who had become like a younger brother to him. "Thomas, if I am not in my quarters by dawn tomorrow, go to Master Edmund. Tell him everything that has happened, everything you know about me and the princess. He will know what to do." Thomas's eyes widened. "You are meeting her? Secretly?" "William, that is incredibly dangerous. If anyone discovers you—" "I know the risks," William interrupted. "But she needs me. I cannot ignore that, no matter the consequences." He gripped Thomas's shoulder firmly. "Promise me you will do as I ask. Promise me you will seek help if I do not return." "I promise," Thomas said reluctantly. "But William, please be careful. You are the closest thing to a brother I have ever had. I do not want to lose you." William waited in his quarters until the palace had grown quiet, until the sounds of the evening's feast had faded and most of the residents had retired to their beds. Then he wrapped himself in a dark cloak and made his way through the corridors, moving silently and keeping to the shadows. The eastern stairs that led to the Tower Garden were indeed unguarded, as Isolde had indicated, though William suspected this was not by accident. Someone had ensured that this particular route would be unwatched tonight. The Tower Garden was a small, enclosed space at the top of one of the palace's smaller towers. It was rarely used, especially at night, and the isolation made it perfect for secret meetings. William climbed the narrow stairs carefully, his hand on the wall to guide him in the darkness. When he emerged into the garden, he found Isolde waiting for him, a single candle providing dim illumination. She wore a heavy cloak over her nightgown, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders. Her face was pale and strained, and William could see that she had been crying. He went to her immediately, forgetting caution, forgetting propriety, thinking only of her distress. "Isolde, what has happened? Your letter frightened me terribly." She fell into his arms with a sob, and William held her tightly, one hand stroking her hair while she wept against his chest. They stood like that for several minutes, the only sounds her muffled crying and the distant call of an owl somewhere in the palace grounds. Finally, Isolde pulled back slightly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Philippe has asked my father for my hand in marriage," she said, her voice rough from crying, "and my father has agreed. The betrothal will be announced tomorrow night at a special feast. I am to be married in the spring, taken to Normandy to become Philippe's wife, and eventually his duchess." William felt as if the ground had opened beneath his feet. He had known this was coming, had tried to prepare himself for it, but the reality was far worse than he had imagined. "What did you say when you were told?" "I asked my father for more time," Isolde said. "I told him I was not ready, that I needed to know Philippe better before making such a commitment. But he was firm. He said I had refused enough proposals, that at my age I could not afford to be too particular. He said Philippe was an excellent match, that the alliance with Normandy would strengthen England's position significantly. He spoke of duty and responsibility and the greater good. Those are not invalid arguments, William said quietly, though each word felt like swallowing glass. Your father is right. From a political standpoint, this marriage makes perfect sense. I do not care about political sense, Isolde said fiercely. I care about spending my life with someone I can respect and love, someone who sees me as more than a valuable breeding mare. Philippe is handsome and charming, yes, but he is also arrogant and dismissive. He speaks to me as if I were a child, as if my opinions on matters of state are amusing but ultimately irrelevant. He wants a beautiful ornament for his court, not a true partner. Have you told him this? William asked. Have you been honest about what you want from a marriage? I tried, Isolde said, but he laughed and told me that women who concern themselves with politics become bitter and unfeminine. He said his mother is a perfect example of what a duchess should be, gracious, elegant, devoted to her husband and children, and wise enough to leave important decisions to the men who understand such matters. William felt anger flare in his chest at Philippe's condescension, but he forced himself to remain calm. Then refuse him. Tell your father you cannot marry a man who does not respect you. And say what? Isolde asked desperately. That I want to marry a blacksmith instead? That I have fallen in love with a commoner and would rather be exiled from the royal family than wed a prince? My father would never understand. He would think I had lost my mind. William took her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. Is that what you want? Truly? To marry me, despite everything it would cost you? Yes, Isolde said without hesitation. I know it is impossible. I know it is foolish, but yes, I would rather spend my life with you in poverty than spend it with Philippe in a palace. You see me, William. You value my mind and my heart. You treat me as an equal. That is worth more to me than all the gold in Normandy. William felt his throat tighten with emotion. Isolde, I love you. I have tried not to, have fought against it with everything I have, but I cannot deny it any longer. You are everything I have ever wanted, everything I never dared to hope for. But loving you does not change the reality of our situations. You are a princess. I am a blacksmith. The gap between us is too vast to bridge. What if we ran away? Isolde said suddenly. What if we simply left, disappeared into the countryside where no one knows us? We could start a new life together, free from the constraints of duty and station. William wanted desperately to say yes, to agree to this fantasy, and escape with her into some imagined future where love was enough. But he had lived too long in the real world to believe such a thing was possible. They would find us, he said gently. Your father has the resources of the entire kingdom at his disposal. We could not hide forever, and when we were found, the consequences would be severe. You would be dragged back and forced to marry Philippe anyway, probably under guard. And I would be executed for kidnapping a princess, if not worse. Then what do we do? Isolde asked, tears streaming down her face again. I cannot bear the thought of marrying Philippe, of spending the rest of my life pretending to be happy while my heart breaks. But I also cannot condemn you to death. There must be some other option, some way out of this impossible situation. William pulled her close again, wishing he had answers but finding none. They stood together in the darkness, holding each other as if that alone could solve their problems. In the distance, the city of London spread out beneath them, thousands of people sleeping peacefully, unaware of the drama unfolding in the palace tower. Finally, William said quietly, there might be one possibility. It is risky, and success is far from guaranteed, but it might work. Isolde pulled back to look at him. Tell me, whatever it is, I am willing to try. Your father respects service and loyalty above all else? William said slowly, working through the idea as he spoke. What if I were to perform some great deed, something that would elevate my status and make me a more suitable match? Not equal to a prince, perhaps, but at least worthy of consideration. What kind of deed? Isolde asked. What could possibly change my father's mind about your station? I do not know yet, William admitted, but there must be something. Some task that needs doing, some problem that needs solving. If I could prove my worth in a way that cannot be ignored, your father might be willing to reconsider the rigid boundaries of class and station. Isolde looked thoughtful. There is unrest in the northern territories, she said slowly. Several lords have been feuding over land boundaries, and their disputes have escalated into violence. My father is concerned that it might develop into open rebellion if not addressed quickly. He has been searching for someone to send as a mediator, someone who can negotiate a peaceful resolution. But surely he would send an experienced diplomat, not a blacksmith, William said. The nobles involved do not trust diplomats, Isolde explained. They see them as manipulative, as having hidden agendas. What they need is someone honest, someone they can believe is genuinely interested in finding a fair solution rather than advancing political interests. Someone like you. William considered this. It was dangerous, certainly. Riding into the middle of a territorial dispute between armed nobles was not something to be undertaken lightly. But it was also exactly the kind of opportunity he needed, a chance to prove himself worthy of consideration as more than just a skilled craftsman. How would I even be considered for such a mission? He asked. I have no experience in diplomacy or negotiation. I will speak to my father, Isolde said, her eyes brightening with hope. I will suggest that what the northern lords need is not a smooth-talking diplomat, but someone with integrity and common sense, someone who can speak plainly about right and wrong. I will recommend you for the task. He will think it is strange that you are advocating for a blacksmith to undertake a diplomatic mission, William warned. Let me worry about that, Isolde said. I have spent my entire life learning how to influence my father's decisions without seeming to do so. This is something I can accomplish, if you are willing to take the risk. William thought of the alternative, watching Isolde marry Philippe, spending the rest of his life knowing that she was trapped in a loveless marriage while he remained alone. Compared to that, riding north to mediate a dispute seemed like a small risk indeed. I am willing, he said firmly. If there is even a chance that success in this mission might change your father's mind, might make him see me as something more than a common tradesman, then I will do whatever is necessary. Isolde threw her arms around him again, this time in joy rather than despair. Thank you. Thank you for being willing to fight for us, for not simply accepting that we are doomed to be apart. They held each other for a long moment, savoring the closeness, the warmth of each other's presence. Then William reluctantly pulled away. You need to return to your chambers before someone notices your absence, and I need to get back to my quarters before the guards begin their dawn rounds. When will I see you again? Isolde asked. Once your father approves the mission, I will need to meet with you to receive instructions and information about the northern lords and their dispute. Until then, we must be careful. Philippe is not a fool. If he suspects there is something between us, he will take steps to eliminate the threat. He is not as clever as he thinks, Isolde said with a touch of scorn. But you are right. We must be careful. She reached up and kissed him softly, a brief touch of lips that sent fire racing through William's veins. For luck, she whispered, and as a promise that there will be more to come, once we have found a way to be together. William watched her descend the stairs, waiting until he could no longer hear her footsteps before making his own way back to his quarters. His mind was racing with plans and possibilities, hopes and fears. The task ahead would not be easy. Mediating between feuding nobles, men with armies at their command and generations of grievances to fuel their anger, would require all the wisdom and courage he possessed. But if success meant a chance at a life with Isolde, then he would face whatever challenges lay ahead without hesitation. The morning after William's midnight meeting with Isolde, the palace was abuzz with preparations for the grand feast where the betrothal would be announced. Servants rushed through the corridors carrying armloads of flowers and fine linens, while cooks labored in the kitchens to prepare dishes elaborate enough to impress the Norman delegation. William went about his work at the forge with mechanical efficiency, his mind elsewhere, waiting for some sign that Isolde had succeeded in speaking with her father. The sign came just after midday, when Lord Chamberlain Aldrich appeared at the forge entrance, his expression as inscrutable as ever. William's apprentices immediately stopped working and bowed, and William set down the horseshoe he had been shaping to do the same. William Fletcher, Aldrich said formally, His Majesty requests your presence in the council chamber. You are to come immediately. William's heart leaped into his throat, but he kept his expression neutral. Of course, my lord. Allow me a moment to make myself presentable. He washed the soot from his face and hands, changed into a clean tunic, and followed Aldrich through the palace corridors. The council chamber was a smaller, more intimate space than the great hall, with a long table of polished oak and chairs for perhaps a dozen people. King Edward sat at the head of the table, with several of his senior advisors arranged on either side. Isolde was not present, which William found both disappointing and prudent. "William Fletcher," the king said, gesturing for him to approach. "My daughter has made an interesting suggestion regarding the situation in the north. She believes you might be the right person to undertake a delicate diplomatic mission." William bowed deeply. "I am honored by Princess Isolde's confidence, Your Majesty, though I confess I am surprised. I have no training in diplomacy or statecraft." "That is precisely the point," one of the advisors interjected. He was a man of perhaps 60 years, with sharp eyes and the bearing of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I am Lord Chancellor Oswald. The situation in the north has deteriorated because the lords involved do not trust traditional diplomats. They believe, with some justification, that courtiers speak in riddles and pursue hidden agendas. What they need is someone who can speak plainly, someone whose honesty is beyond question." Another advisor, a younger man with the muscular build of a warrior, leaned forward. "I am Sir Marcus, commander of the King's Guard. I must counsel against this plan, Your Majesty. The Northern Territories are dangerous. Lord Blackwood and Lord Ashford have already come to blows twice, and their men are armed and looking for an excuse to fight. Sending an inexperienced negotiator into such a volatile situation is asking for disaster." "Your concerns are noted, Sir Marcus," King Edward said calmly. "But Princess Isolde has made a compelling argument. She points out that William Fletcher demonstrated remarkable courage and initiative when he came to the palace on behalf of a dying boy. He spoke eloquently and honestly, without fear or artifice. These are precisely the qualities needed to cut through the posturing and pride that have prevented resolution thus far." William felt a surge of gratitude toward Isolde for framing his qualifications so effectively. "If I may ask, Your Majesty, what exactly is the nature of the dispute between these lords?" Lord Chancellor Oswald spread a map on the table, his gnarled finger tracing a boundary between two territories. "Lord Blackwood and Lord Ashford share a border here, in the northern hills. The boundary was established 50 years ago, but recent flooding changed the course of the river that marks the division. Both lords claim the land that now lies between the old riverbed and the new one. It is perhaps 200 acres. Not particularly valuable except that it contains a mill that provides income to whichever lord controls it. 200 acres and a mill hardly seem worth fighting over," William observed. "Surely the cost of war far outweighs the value of the disputed land." "That is exactly the rational argument that diplomats have been making for months," Oswald said with a hint of frustration. "But this is not truly about the land. It is about pride, about neither lord being willing to appear weak by backing down. They are locked in a cycle of escalation, each feeling that any compromise would be seen as defeat." William studied the map carefully, an idea beginning to form in his mind. What if the solution is not to determine who owns the disputed land, but to change the nature of ownership itself? What if the land and the mill were held in common, with both lords sharing the income equally? The advisors exchanged glances. Sir Marcus looked skeptical, but Oswald appeared intrigued. "That is an unconventional approach," the Chancellor said slowly, "but it might work. Neither lord would have to admit defeat, and both would benefit financially. The difficulty would be in getting them to agree to such an arrangement. That would be the negotiator's task," King Edward said, his gray eyes fixed on William with unsettling intensity. "To present this solution, or something similar, in a way that both lords can accept without feeling they have lost face. It will require diplomacy, creativity, and no small amount of courage. Are you prepared to undertake such a mission, William Fletcher?" William thought of Isolde, of the desperate hope in her eyes the previous night, of the future they both wanted but could not have unless he proved himself worthy of consideration. "I am, Your Majesty. I will do everything in my power to bring peace to the Northern Territories." "You will leave in 3 days," the king said decisively. "That will give you time to study the details of the dispute, to understand the personalities of the lords involved, and to prepare for the journey. Lord Oswald will provide you with all necessary documents and information. Sir Marcus, despite your reservations, you will assign 4 of your best men to accompany William as an escort. He may be a skilled negotiator, but he is not a warrior, and I will not send him into danger without protection." "As you command, Your Majesty," Sir Marcus said, though his tone suggested he still thought this was a terrible idea. The meeting concluded, and William found himself escorted to a small study where Lord Oswald spent the next several hours briefing him on the intricacies of northern politics. He learned that Lord Blackwood was a man in his 50s, proud and stubborn, who had inherited his title from a father known for his military prowess. Lord Ashford was younger, perhaps 40, and had earned his position through service to the crown rather than inheritance. The two men had been rivals for years, competing for influence and prestige, and the boundary dispute had simply become the latest battleground in their ongoing conflict. The key, Oswald explained, is to make both men feel that they are gaining something valuable, not merely compromising. Appeal to their sense of honor and their desire to be remembered as wise leaders rather than petty squabblers. And whatever you do, do not allow yourself to be drawn into taking sides. The moment you appear to favor one lord over the other, you will lose all credibility with both. William absorbed the information like a sponge, asking questions when he needed clarification, taking notes to help him remember important details. By the time Oswald finally dismissed him, his head was spinning with names and dates and the complex web of alliances that characterized northern politics. That evening, the grand feast proceeded as planned. William was not invited, as it was strictly for nobility and high-ranking guests, but he heard about it the next day from servants who described the opulence in awed tones. Prince Philippe had apparently given a speech about the alliance between England and Normandy, about the bright future that awaited once he and Princess Isolde were wed. The princess herself had smiled and accepted congratulations graciously, giving no sign of the turmoil William knew she must be feeling. He did not see Isolde before his departure, though he received a brief note delivered by the same discreet maid who had brought her previous message. "Thank you for being willing to do this." The note read, "I pray for your success and your safe return. Know that my heart travels with you, wherever you may go. I." William tucked the note inside his tunic, close to his heart, and focused on his preparations. Sir Marcus had indeed assigned 4 guards to accompany him, seasoned warriors who regarded their new charge with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Their leader was a man named Owen, grizzled and scarred, who had served in the king's army for 20 years. "I will speak plainly, Master Fletcher," Owen said, as they prepared the horses for the journey. "The men and I think this is a fool's errand. Northern lords do not listen to diplomats, no matter how honest or clever. They listen to strength, to the weight of steel. But we have our orders, and we will keep you safe to the best of our abilities." "I appreciate your honesty, Owen," William said, "and I understand your concerns. But I believe there is more than one kind of strength. Sometimes the courage to seek peace requires more steel than the willingness to make war." Owen grunted, neither agreeing nor disagreeing, and returned to checking the horses' equipment. William took a moment to visit Thomas and Beatrice before he left, wanting to say farewell properly. "You are taking a great risk," Beatrice said, gripping his hands tightly. "These northern lords are dangerous men, and the situation is volatile. Promise me you will be careful, that you will not let pride or stubbornness put you in unnecessary danger." "I promise," William said. "But Beatrice, if I succeed in this mission, it could change everything. It could open doors that have always been closed to people like us. That possibility is worth the risk." Thomas embraced him fiercely. "Come back safely," the boy said. "You saved my life. I do not want to lose you now." "You will not lose me," William assured him. "I have too much to live for to throw my life away carelessly." The journey north took 5 days of hard riding. They traveled through countryside that grew progressively wilder and more rugged. The gentle rolling hills around London, giving way to steep valleys and rocky outcroppings. The weather turned cold and wet, with frequent rain showers that soaked them to the bone despite their heavy cloaks. They spent nights at inns when they could find them, and camped in the open when they could not. William used the time to continue studying the documents Oswald had provided, memorizing details about the disputed territory and the history of relations between the two lords. He also talked with Owen and the other guards, learning about their experiences in the northern territories, about the customs and expectations of the people there. The guards gradually warmed to him, impressed by his willingness to learn and his lack of arrogance despite his royal appointment. They arrived at Blackwood Castle on a gray afternoon, the fortress looming above them like a stone giant. It was an old structure built for defense rather than comfort, with thick walls and narrow windows. Guards in Blackwood livery challenged them at the gate, but allowed them entry once William presented his credentials as a royal envoy. Lord Blackwood himself received them in a drafty great hall hung with faded tapestries depicting ancient battles. He was a large man, broad-shouldered and thick through the middle, with iron-gray hair and a beard that reached his chest. His eyes were sharp and suspicious as he studied William. "So King Edward sends a blacksmith to negotiate with lords," Blackwood said, his voice heavy with disdain. "What kind of insult is this? Does he think so little of our dispute that he cannot even send a proper diplomat?" William had anticipated this reaction and did not allow it to rattle him. "His Majesty sends someone who speaks the truth plainly, my lord, without the flowery language and hidden meanings that so often characterize diplomatic discourse. I am here to help you find a solution to your conflict with Lord Ashford, not to play political games or advance personal agendas." Blackwood studied him for a long moment, then barked out a laugh. "At least you have spine, I will give you that. Most courtiers would have wilted under my glare." "Very well, blacksmith. Tell me what you know of this dispute." William spent the next hour discussing the situation with Blackwood, listening carefully to the lord's perspective on the boundary disagreement. Blackwood insisted that the disputed land had always belonged to his family, that the river's change of course was irrelevant to the historical boundary. He spoke with genuine passion about his family's legacy, about the responsibility he felt to pass on an intact inheritance to his son. "I understand your position, my lord," William said when Blackwood had finished. "But I would ask you to consider this. What will your son inherit if this dispute escalates into open warfare? A devastated territory, depleted resources, perhaps even a disputed succession if you yourself are killed in battle. Is that the legacy you wish to leave?" Blackwood's expression darkened. "Are you threatening me, blacksmith? I am asking you to think clearly about consequences," William said calmly. "You are a military man, Lord Blackwood. You understand that every conflict has costs. The question is whether those costs are justified by the potential gains. 200 acres and a mill set against the possibility of losing everything you have built. Does that equation make sense to you?" For the first time, Blackwood looked uncertain rather than angry. "What solution do you propose? That I simply give up my family's rightful property?" "No, my lord. I propose something different." William pulled out the map Oswald had given him and spread it on the table. "What if neither you nor Lord Ashford owned the disputed land exclusively? What if it were held in common, with both of you sharing the mill's income equally? You would lose nothing, because you would still benefit from the land's productivity, and Lord Ashford would also benefit, which means he would have no reason to continue fighting." Blackwood frowned, considering this. "Shared ownership, that is unusual. How would we ensure fair division of the income? How would we prevent disputes over management of the mill?" "We would establish clear guidelines, documented and witnessed, that specify exactly how the arrangement will work," William explained. "Both of you would appoint representatives to oversee the mill's operation jointly. Any disputes would be referred to the King's Justice for resolution. It would require trust and cooperation, but it would also ensure peace and prosperity for both your territories." Blackwood was silent for several minutes, his brow furrowed in thought. Finally he said, "I will not agree to anything until I hear what Ashford thinks of this proposal. If he is willing to accept such an arrangement, then perhaps I could be persuaded. But I want your word, blacksmith, that you will present this same proposal to him without alteration, that you will not favor his interests over mine." "You have my word, my lord," William said solemnly. "I serve only the cause of peace and the King's justice, not the interests of either party." The next day, William and his escort rode to Ashford Keep, a newer fortress built in a more modern style with larger windows and more comfortable accommodations. Lord Ashford was indeed younger than Blackwood, with a lean, athletic build and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. He listened to William's proposal with careful attention, asking pointed questions about implementation and enforcement. "This is a clever solution," Ashford admitted. "It addresses the core issue without requiring either of us to admit defeat. But I do not trust Blackwood. He is stubborn and prideful, and he has made no secret of his contempt for me. How can I be certain he will honor such an agreement?" William leaned forward, meeting Lord Ashford's skeptical gaze with steady confidence. "The agreement would be guaranteed by the Crown itself, my lord. Any violation of the terms would be considered an offense against the King's peace, punishable by loss of title and lands. Neither you nor Lord Blackwood would risk such severe consequences over a boundary dispute, no matter how stubborn your pride." Ashford considered this, his fingers drumming thoughtfully on the arm of his chair. "And what of the historical grievances between our families? This conflict is about more than just land and a mill. There are generations of rivalry, insults traded, slights remembered. Can a piece of parchment truly erase all of that? No, William said honestly, but it can provide a foundation upon which trust might eventually be built. My lord, I have seen what happens when pride and anger are allowed to fester unchecked. I grew up in poverty, watching people destroy themselves and their families over grudges that should have been released years earlier. You are a better man than that. You earned your title through service and merit, not merely inheritance. You have the wisdom to see past the immediate satisfaction of conflict to the long-term benefits of peace. Ashford's expression shifted, something like respect entering his eyes. You speak well for a blacksmith. Tell me, what is your true interest in this matter? Why would a craftsman care about the squabbles of northern lords? William chose his words carefully, aware that honesty might serve him better than diplomacy. I seek to prove that a man's worth should be measured by his character and abilities, not merely by his birth. King Edward has given me an opportunity to demonstrate my value through this mission. If I succeed, I hope it will open doors that have traditionally been closed to people of common origin. Ambition, Ashford said, a slight smile playing at his lips. That is something I understand well. Very well, William Fletcher. I will accept your proposal on one condition, that you arrange a meeting between myself and Blackwood face to face, where we can negotiate the final terms together. I will not agree to anything until I can look him in the eye and hear his commitment directly. That is a reasonable request, my lord, William said. I will carry your response to Lord Blackwood immediately. The journey back to Blackwood Castle took less than a day, and William was relieved to find the older lord in a more receptive mood than during their first meeting. When William explained Ashford's willingness to consider the shared ownership proposal but his insistence on a face-to-face meeting, Blackwood actually nodded in approval. At least Ashford has some courage, Blackwood said. I have more respect for a man willing to meet his rival directly than for one who hides behind intermediaries. Very well, I agree to the meeting, but it must be on neutral ground, somewhere neither of us has advantage. William had anticipated this requirement and had already identified a suitable location. There is a monastery halfway between your territories, my lord. The brothers there have a reputation for hospitality and neutrality. They would welcome the opportunity to host a peace negotiation, and their presence would ensure that tempers remain controlled. The monastery of St. Benedict, Blackwood mused. Yes, that would serve. When shall this meeting take place? As soon as arrangements can be made, William said. Perhaps 3 days hence? That should give both parties time to prepare and travel. Blackwood agreed, and William sent one of Owen's men to carry word to Lord Ashford while he himself remained at Blackwood Castle to finalize details. The next 3 days were tense, with William constantly worried that something would go wrong, that one of the lords would change his mind, or that some new incident would inflame tensions. But both men proved better than their reputations suggested, and when the appointed day arrived, both parties rode to the monastery as agreed. The monastery of St. Benedict sat in a peaceful valley, its stone walls weathered by centuries but still strong. The abbot, a scholarly man named Brother Thomas, received the lords and their escorts with gracious hospitality. He assigned them separate quarters to avoid accidental confrontations and prepared his chapter house for the negotiations. The meeting began awkwardly, with both lords regarding each other with barely concealed hostility. William sat between them, feeling the weight of expectation pressing down on his shoulders. Owen and the other guards stood along the walls, ready to intervene if violence threatened, while Brother Thomas sat quietly in a corner, his presence a reminder of the sacred ground on which they met. My lords, William began, his voice calm and clear. You are both here because you recognize that the current situation is unsustainable. Your territories suffer, your people live in fear of war, and the conflict serves no one's true interests. I have proposed a solution that would benefit both of you equally. Before we discuss details, I would ask each of you to speak about what you truly want from this negotiation, not what you think you should want, not what pride demands, but what would actually serve your interests and those of your people. Lord Blackwood spoke first, his gruff voice filling the chamber. I want to preserve my family's honor and pass on a secure inheritance to my son. I want my people to prosper without fear of attack. And yes, I want the income from that damned mill, because my treasury is not as full as people imagine, and I need every source of revenue I can maintain. Lord Ashford nodded slowly, a gesture of understanding that surprised everyone present. "I want recognition that I have earned my place among the Northern Lords, that my title was not simply given, but won through service. I want my territory to grow and prosper, and I also want the mill's income, because, like Lord Blackwood, I have expenses that strain my resources." "Then you both want essentially the same things," William observed. "Security, prosperity, and respect. The question is whether you can achieve those goals through cooperation rather than conflict." "Lord Blackwood, you spoke of your son's inheritance. What kind of world do you want him to inherit? One torn by constant warfare, or one where lords work together for mutual benefit?" Blackwood was quiet for a moment. "When you put it that way, the answer is obvious. But how can I trust Ashford to honor any agreement we make? How do I know he will not simply use peace as an opportunity to strengthen his position and then attack when I least expect it?" "The same way I must trust you," Ashford said, speaking directly to his rival for the first time, "by recognizing that we are both bound by something larger than our personal rivalry. We both swore oaths to King Edward. We both have responsibilities to our people. We both want our legacies to be something more than petty feuds and wasted lives. Those shared values must be enough, because the alternative is mutual destruction." William saw something shift in Blackwood's expression, a softening of the hard edges. "You are not what I expected, Ashford. The stories I have heard painted you as arrogant and grasping, but you speak with sense and honor, and you are not the brutal, unreasoning warlord that rumor suggested." Ashford replied, "Perhaps we have both been victims of gossip and misunderstanding. Perhaps it is time we judged each other based on actions rather than reputation." William seized on this opening. "Then let us move forward with the proposal. The disputed land and mill will be held jointly by both of you. Income will be divided equally, and management decisions will be made by appointed representatives working together. Any disputes will be referred to the King's Justice. The agreement will be documented, witnessed, and sealed with both your marks. And most importantly, both of you will commit to maintaining peace along your shared border, with violations punishable by royal intervention." The negotiation continued for hours, with both lords raising concerns and requesting modifications to the basic framework. William mediated carefully, ensuring that neither side gained advantage over the other, that every concession was matched by a corresponding benefit. Brother Thomas contributed occasionally, offering suggestions drawn from centuries of monastic experience in resolving conflicts. Finally, as the afternoon light began to fade, Lord Blackwood extended his hand across the table. "I agree to these terms," he said solemnly, "and I give my word as a Lord of England that I will honor them faithfully." Lord Ashford clasped the offered hand firmly. "As do I. Let this be the beginning of a new relationship between our houses, one based on mutual respect rather than mutual suspicion." Brother Thomas produced parchment and ink, and both lords affixed their seals to the document that William had carefully drafted during the negotiations. Owen and another guard signed as witnesses, along with Brother Thomas himself. When it was done, William felt a profound sense of relief and accomplishment wash over him. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you have done something remarkable here today. You have chosen wisdom over pride, cooperation over conflict. Your people will prosper because of the decision you have made, and your names will be remembered with honor." The lords departed the next morning, each returning to his own territory. William remained at the monastery for one additional day, ensuring that Brother Thomas understood the terms of the agreement and would serve as a neutral keeper of the document. Then he and his escort began the journey back to London. Owen rode beside William, a rare smile on his weathered face. "I admit it freely, Master Fletcher. I was wrong about you. I thought this mission was folly, that northern lords would never listen to a blacksmith's counsel. But you achieved what trained diplomats could not. You have a rare gift for seeing past the surface of conflicts to the human hearts beneath." "I simply treated them as I would want to be treated," William said, "with honesty and respect. It is amazing how far those simple virtues can take you, even in the complex world of politics." The journey south seemed shorter than the journey north, perhaps because William's heart was lighter, his mind filled with hope about what his success might mean for his future with Isolde. As London's walls came into view, he allowed himself to imagine the conversation with King Edward, the moment when he would present the signed agreement and demonstrate that he had accomplished what everyone thought impossible. They arrived at the palace in the late afternoon of their 10th day away. William went immediately to his quarters to wash and change into clean clothes before reporting to the king. But as he was preparing to leave for the throne room, Thomas burst through his door, his young face pale and strained. "William, thank God you are back," Thomas said breathlessly. "Everything has gone wrong while you were away. The princess, she—" "What about Isolde?" William demanded, his heart suddenly racing with fear. "What has happened?" "She refused to proceed with the betrothal," Thomas said. "She told her father she could not marry Prince Philippe, that she had given her heart to another." The king was furious. He demanded to know who this other man was, but she would not say. Philippe was insulted and left for Normandy 3 days ago, swearing that the alliance between our kingdoms was finished. And now the king has confined Princess Isolde to her chambers until she agrees to be reasonable. William felt the bottom drop out of his world. Isolde had done exactly what he had feared, had revealed her feelings without waiting to see if his mission would succeed. Now everything was ruined. The diplomatic alliance destroyed, the king furious, and Isolde imprisoned in her own chambers. "I need to see the king immediately," William said. "I need to present the agreement from the north and try to salvage something from this disaster." "There is more," Thomas said reluctantly. "The king has already announced that Princess Isolde will be sent to a convent until she comes to her senses. He is convinced that some unworthy man has seduced her, has taken advantage of her innocence. He is investigating everyone she has had contact with over the past months." William's mind raced. If the king's investigation was thorough, it would eventually lead to him. The secret meetings, the visits to the forge, the time they had spent together, would all be uncovered. He could run, could disappear into the countryside and try to start a new life elsewhere. But that would mean abandoning Isolde, leaving her to face her father's anger alone. No, he had not come this far, had not risked everything, only to flee at the first sign of danger. He would face the king, would present his success in the north, and would confess the truth about his relationship with Isolde. Whatever consequences followed, he would face them with his head held high. "Thank you for warning me, Thomas," William said, gripping the boy's shoulder. "But I will not run. I will speak to the king, tell him everything, and let him judge whether I am worthy of his daughter's love." He made his way to the throne room, where he found King Edward in conference with his advisors. The king looked older than William remembered, his face lined with stress and anger. When William entered and bowed, Edward's gray eyes fixed on him with an intensity that was almost physical. "William Fletcher," the king said, his voice cold, "I hear you have returned from the north. I trust your mission was successful." "It was, your majesty," William said, producing the signed agreement. "Lords Blackwood and Ashford have agreed to shared ownership of the disputed territory and have committed to maintaining peace along their border. The document bears their seals and has been witnessed properly." King Edward took the parchment and read it carefully, his expression unreadable. Finally, he looked up. "This is impressive work. You accomplished what I had begun to think was impossible. Under other circumstances, I would reward you generously for such service." "Under other circumstances, your majesty?" William asked, though he already knew what was coming. "My daughter has revealed that she has formed an attachment to someone she considers more worthy than a prince of Normandy," Edward said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Someone who has apparently convinced her that love matters more than duty, that personal happiness justifies destroying diplomatic alliances. I have been conducting an investigation to discover the identity of this man. Would you happen to know anything about that, William Fletcher?" William met the king's gaze steadily. "I do, your majesty. The man in question is standing before you." A shocked silence filled the throne room. The advisors stared at William with expressions ranging from disbelief to horror. Only King Edward seemed unsurprised, as if he had already suspected the truth. "You dare," Edward said softly, rising from his throne. "You dare to stand before me and admit that you have corrupted my daughter, that you have betrayed the trust I placed in you." "I have not corrupted her, your majesty," William said firmly. "I love her, and she loves me. We have done nothing shameful, nothing that would dishonor either of us. We have simply recognized that we are better together than apart, that the connection between us transcends the artificial barriers of class and station." "Artificial barriers?" Edward's voice rose to a roar. "You call the foundation of civilized society artificial? You, a blacksmith's son, presume to think yourself worthy of a princess? "I presume nothing, Your Majesty," William said, his own voice rising now to match the king's passion. "But I ask you to judge me not by my birth, but by my actions. I risked my life to save a dying boy because it was right. I accomplished a diplomatic mission that everyone thought impossible. I have shown loyalty, courage, and integrity in everything I have done. Are those not the qualities that make a man worthy of respect? Are those not the virtues you claim to value above all others?" Edward descended from the dais, standing directly in front of William. For a moment, William thought the king might strike him, but instead, Edward simply studied him with those penetrating gray eyes, as if seeing him for the first time. "You make a compelling argument," Edward said finally, his voice quieter now. "And if you were asking for a commendation or a promotion, or even a title, I might be inclined to grant it. But you are asking for my daughter. You are asking me to set aside every tradition, every expectation, every political consideration, and allow a princess to marry a commoner. Do you understand what that would mean? The scandal it would cause? The precedent it would set?" "I understand all of that, Your Majesty," William said. "But I also understand what it would mean to Isolde to be forced into a loveless marriage for political convenience. I have seen the joy in her eyes when she speaks about a future where she has agency over her own life, where her mind and heart are valued as much as her royal blood. Can you truly deny her that happiness? Happiness is a luxury that royalty cannot always afford," Edward said, but there was less certainty in his voice now. "We have responsibilities that go beyond personal desires." "Then let her fulfill those responsibilities in a different way," William pressed. "Let her marry me and remain in England, continuing to advise you and serve the kingdom as she has always done. She does not need to marry a foreign prince to be valuable to the realm. Her true value lies in her wisdom and compassion, not in her ability to cement alliances through marriage." Edward turned away, walking slowly back to his throne. He sat heavily, suddenly looking every one of his 40-odd years. "Leave me," he said to his advisors. "I need to think." The advisors filed out reluctantly, casting curious glances at William as they passed. Soon, only the king and William remained in the great hall, the silence between them thick with tension and unspoken possibilities. "My wife died 12 years ago," Edward said finally, his voice soft. "She was the love of my life, the one person who truly understood me. When she died, a part of me died with her. I have tried to be a good king, to rule wisely and justly. But I have also tried to protect Isolde from the pain of loss, from the vulnerability that comes with loving someone completely. I thought an arranged marriage to a suitable prince would spare her the kind of heartbreak I experienced. But Your Majesty," William said gently, "denying her the chance to love is not protecting her from pain. It is guaranteeing a different kind of suffering, one that lasts a lifetime. Your love for your wife, even though it ended in loss, was still worth having, was it not?" Edward looked at William, and for the first time there was something like understanding in his eyes. "Yes," he admitted, "it was worth every moment of pain that followed. And you are right. I have been trying to protect Isolde from something that cannot be avoided, that is in fact essential to a full life." He stood again, descending from the dais once more. This time, when he approached William, his expression was thoughtful rather than angry. "Tell me truthfully, William Fletcher, do you love my daughter enough to face whatever challenges come with marrying a princess? The scrutiny, the gossip, the nobles who will never fully accept you? Can you stand beside her as an equal partner, supporting her ambitions while pursuing your own?" "I can, Your Majesty," William said with absolute conviction. "I love Isolde more than my own life. I would face any challenge, endure any hardship, if it meant we could be together. And I swear to you, on everything I hold sacred, that I will spend every day proving myself worthy of the trust you place in me." King Edward was silent for a long moment, weighing his decision. Finally, he extended his hand. "Then you have my blessing, William Fletcher. Marry my daughter, if she will still have you after the chaos of these past days. But understand this, I am creating a new title for you, one that will give you sufficient status to marry a princess without causing complete scandal. You will become Lord William, Baron of the Eastern March, with lands and income sufficient to support a household appropriate for my daughter. You will continue to serve me and England, using your unique perspective to help bridge the gap between nobility and common folk." William felt tears prick at his eyes as he clasped the king's hand. "Thank you, Your Majesty." Thank you for seeing past the circumstances of my birth to the content of my character. I will not disappoint you. See that you do not, Edward said, though his tone had warmed considerably. Now go to my daughter. She has been miserable these past days, convinced that she has ruined everything. Tell her that love has prevailed, that sometimes the heart knows wisdom that the head cannot perceive. William bowed deeply, then practically ran from the throne room. He made his way to Isolde's chambers, where guards stood watch. They looked uncertain when he approached, but before they could stop him, the door opened from within, and Isolde emerged, her eyes red from crying, her face pale but beautiful still. "William," she breathed, "Thomas told me you had returned. I feared I would never see you again, that my father would banish you, or worse. Your father has given us his blessing," William said, taking her hands in his. "We can be married, Isolde. We can spend our lives together, just as we dreamed." Isolde's eyes widened in disbelief. "Truly?" He agreed. "But how? What changed his mind?" "I told him the truth," William said simply. "About us, about my feelings, about why you deserve the chance to choose your own future. And I reminded him that love, even when it involves risk and pain, is always worth having." Isolde threw her arms around him, laughing and crying at the same time. "I cannot believe this is real. I was so certain we were doomed that I had destroyed everything with my stubborn refusal to marry Philippe." "You were brave," William said, holding her close. "You stood up for what you believed in, even when it cost you everything. That is the woman I fell in love with, the woman I will spend my life cherishing." They stood together in the corridor, the guards discreetly looking away, and William felt complete in a way he never had before. The journey from the poor quarter to this moment had been long and difficult, filled with obstacles that had seemed insurmountable. But love had prevailed, as it sometimes did in a world that desperately needed more of it. 3 months later, on a spring day when the gardens were in full bloom, William and Isolde were married in a ceremony that brought together nobles and common folk alike. Beatrice and Thomas stood in places of honor, witnesses to the extraordinary journey that had brought a blacksmith and a princess together. King Edward presided over the ceremony with visible pride, having come to genuinely respect his new son-in-law. As William and Isolde exchanged their vows, promising to love and honor each other for all their days, William thought back to that morning when he had run through London streets to plead for a dying boy's life. He had never imagined that single act of compassion would lead him here, to this moment of perfect happiness. But life, he had learned, had a way of rewarding those who stood for what was right, even when the path was difficult and the outcome uncertain. The celebration that followed lasted 3 days, with music and dancing and feasting that brought joy to everyone who attended. And when it was finally over, when William and Isolde began their new life together as Baron and Baroness of the Eastern March, they did so with the knowledge that their love had overcome every obstacle placed before it, that they had proven love and character mattered more than birth or station. Together, they would work to make England a place where such truths were recognized not as exceptions, but as the natural order of a just society. And in the years to come, their example would inspire others to believe that true nobility came not from blood, but from the courage to stand for love, justice, and the dignity of every human soul.